When the widow reached the dark cabin with 2 children and a sled full of everything she still owned, the old canine was the first one to hear her. Caleb Mercer kept his porch light off for a reason. But in that Montana blizzard, a woman looked straight at him and named the wound he had spent 3 years hiding. Snow came down over North Fork Road so thick that the world seemed to have been erased by a careful hand, 1 pine tree, 1 fence post, 1 bend in the road at a time. Near Whitefish, Montana, where Flathead National Forest pressed close to the mountain road and made every cabin feel like a secret, Caleb Mercer sat in the dark with a mug of coffee gone cold beside his boot and a German shepherd asleep across the threshold. The cabin had power, technically. A generator sat in the shed with enough fuel for 3 nights if a man was stingy and did not mind wearing wool indoors. Caleb was stingy. He had learned that in places where warm things could vanish fast, so the kitchen lamp was off, the porch light was off, and the only glow in the room came from the wood stove where orange coals breathed under a crust of ash. Caleb did not need much light. At 43, he could cross that cabin with his eyes closed and put a hand on the rifle safe, the first aid kit, the breaker panel, the locked door to the little room upstairs, or the dent in the table where Sophie had once hammered a spoon into the pine because she had decided pancakes tasted better when made with construction. He did not look at that dent much. He knew where it was. Knowing was enough. Atlas lifted his head before Caleb heard anything. The old German shepherd's ears came up sharp and uneven, the left one nicked from a piece of shrapnel, and the right one perfect as a cutout against the stovelight. His sable coat was black along the saddle and gray at the chest as if someone had dusted him with cold ash. The metal tag on his collar touched the brass ring and made 1 small sound. Tick. Caleb's hand went still around the mug. "Leave it," he said quietly. Atlas did not leave it. That was the trouble with a dog trained by the United States military and then made old by civilian life. He obeyed beautifully until his judgment disagreed with yours, and then he became a 4-legged committee with teeth. The tag sounded again. Tick. Outside, under the smothering fall of snow, something scraped. Caleb set the mug down without a sound. He had been a Navy SEAL, a combat medic when the team needed one, a handler when Atlas chose him, and not the other way around, and a man who had spent more nights listening than sleeping. Some sounds carry intention. A branch breaking under snow has no plan. A deer moving through brush hesitates in the wrong places. A truck engine on packed ice coughs and fights and announces itself like a drunk at a church supper. This sound was smaller, dragging. Wood or plastic against crusted snow, stopping, starting, stopping again. Not a snowmobile. Not Deputy Mara Quinn's county rig. Not Brent Callahan's red snowcat either, which always came with the smug mechanical growl of money pretending to be useful. Caleb rose from the chair, his left knee giving its old, hot complaint. The pain climbed clean up into his hip. He ignored it, because a man can ignore almost anything if he has practiced long enough. Atlas stood with him and moved to the door, nose high. Not barking. That bothered Caleb more than a bark would have. Barking meant stranger. Silence meant assessment. The dog breathed in at the seam under the door and gave a low, tight whine that Caleb had not heard in years. He had heard it in Afghanistan outside a mud wall after an explosion when Atlas found a Marine alive beneath dust and broken timber. He had heard it in a training yard in Virginia when the dog located a volunteer wrapped in a tarp under frozen leaves. It was not fear. It was a report. Human. Weak. Hurry. "No," Caleb said, although no one had asked him anything yet. He crossed to the narrow window beside the door and moved the curtain with 2 fingers. At first he saw only the storm. Snow struck the glass sideways and stuck there, blurring the yard into gray and white. The porch rail had vanished under a rounded drift. The woodpile was a dark hump. The track to the shed was gone. Then movement took shape where the road should have been. a darker blur at the edge of the pines, small against the white. A woman came out of the storm, pulling a child's red sled behind her. She was not walking so much as negotiating with the mountain for the right to take one more step. She leaned forward with her whole body, both hands wrapped around a rope tied to the sled, her boots sinking nearly to the shin. A child walked beside her, small enough that the snow made a wall at her knees. The girl's hands were buried in the sleeves of a coat too thin for that weather, and one boot dragged, as if it had filled with snow and given up. Against the woman's chest was a bundle wrapped in a gray blanket, tucked under her coat. Caleb saw the baby's face only when the woman reached the open patch below the porch and lifted her chin toward the cabin. The face was red where it should not be, and pale where it should not be. Caleb's body knew before his mind made room for it. Cold stress, early hypothermia. Maybe worse if the breathing had slowed. Atlas bumped the door with his shoulder. "Back," Caleb said. Atlas looked over his shoulder at him, and there was something almost insulting in the patience of that look. The dog had watched Caleb disarm bombs, stitch wounds, call air support, lie to dying men with tenderness, and burn toast with military confidence. Atlas knew the difference between an order and a man trying to stay dead while still standing upright. The woman reached the bottom of the steps and stopped. She did not come up. That, too, Caleb noticed. People in real need often have strange manners. Pride can survive hunger. It can survive grief. Sometimes pride is the last dry match in the box, and a person will cup both hands around it even while freezing. She looked up at him through the glass as if she could see him in the dark, though she could not. Her hair, brown with a red edge to it, had escaped her hat and frozen in little ropes beside her cheeks. Her parka was army green, old and shiny at the elbows. One glove was blue, the other was brown. The child gripped the back of her coat and stared at the shut door with eyes too old for her small face. The woman raised one hand, not to knock, yet only to show she was there. Caleb let the curtain fall. He stood very still. Atlas whined again, softer. "Don't start," Caleb muttered. He had rules. They were not written down because no one came close enough to read them, but they governed the cabin better than any law. No porch light after dusk. No visitors past the cattle guard. No charity that turned into expectation. No children inside. That last one was not a rule so much as a locked gate in his chest. 3 years before his wife Rebecca had driven Sophie home from a church pageant in a storm less ugly than this one, Caleb had been overseas, awake under a sky with no snow in it, checking a field dressing on a young man who kept asking whether anyone had called his mother. Caleb's phone had been in a sealed bag with the rest of the team's personal things. By the time he heard the messages, the car had already been pulled out of the drainage ditch. Rebecca's wedding ring had been placed in a plastic envelope, and Sophie's pink coat had been cut off by a paramedic who cried in the ambulance bay and apologized to no one. People told Caleb it was not his fault. They said it gently, often uselessly. He believed them the way a man believes a weather report from last week. The knock came. 3 taps, not loud, not demanding, a polite knock in the middle of a blizzard which struck Caleb as so absurd that for one dangerous second he almost laughed. Atlas did not share the joke. He pawed the floor once and looked at the handle. Caleb opened the door 6 inches and let the cold drive into the room like an accusation. The woman stood below the steps, snow-whitening her eyelashes. "Sir," she said. Her voice had road grit in it. "My name is Hannah Pierce. This is my daughter Maddie and my boy Eli." Caleb said nothing. Hannah swallowed. "I'm looking for a place to get them warm. Town's 7 miles back, roads buried, church has a basement. I came from there." Deputy said they lost power. They had 12 people already and no way up this road. Caleb's jaw tightened. Then you should have stayed where there were 12 people. Hannah looked down at the baby under her coat. He started coughing. I thought if I kept moving, he would stay awake. That was foolish. It was also exactly the kind of foolish a mother does when stillness feels like death. Caleb hated that he understood it. I can't help you, he said. The girl beside Hannah stared at him without blinking. Maddie. 6, maybe. Her face was windburned. One boot had split near the toe and been wrapped with duct tape. She did not cry. Children who do not cry in weather like that have already tried crying and learned the world does not always answer. Caleb felt something in him move, something buried and unwelcome. He shut it down. There are cabins farther down. I know. Hannah lifted her chin. But this one has smoke coming from the pipe. Atlas pushed his nose into the gap in the door and sniffed. The baby made a small sound, then not a cry. Hardly even a complaint, just a thin catch in the throat. Atlas stiffened. Caleb felt it like a hand closing on the back of his neck. Please, Hannah said, and the word seemed to shame her as it left her mouth. She gathered herself, straightened under the weight of the baby, and tried again in a different voice, not softer, truer. You don't have anyone pulling you back when the bad nights come. I can see it. I know that look because my husband had it after the mill took 2 fingers off his hand and sent him home with a pamphlet about resilience. And I don't have anywhere warm to put my children down. I am not asking for money. I can work. I can split kindling, fix a stove, clean, cook, patch a roof badly enough to hold until spring. I'll sleep in your shed if that's all you can stand. But if you close that door, my children have nowhere else to go tonight. The wind moved between them. Snow collected on Hannah's shoulders. Caleb's left hand tightened on the edge of the door until the old scar along his knuckle turned white. He wanted to be angry. Anger would have been clean. A stranger had come out of the weather and read the porch, the dark windows, the unshoveled step, the man who kept a canine but no tire tracks, and she had named him too accurately. She had no right. That was the trouble with desperate people. They used truth because they could no longer afford manners. Who told you to come here? He asked. Nobody. Then why did you? Because my son was breathing funny, and your dog started barking from the road. Caleb looked down at Atlas. He didn't bark. Hannah's mouth trembled, almost a smile, and nowhere near one. Then maybe I heard what I needed to hear. Behind her, Maddie leaned against the sled, not from boredom, from exhaustion. The sled held 2 trash bags tied with rope, a baby blanket stiff with frozen edges, a dented saucepan, a small framed photo wrapped in a towel, and a canvas tool roll. Everything left of a life packed low so it would not tip. Caleb saw it all and resented every object for making itself real. There's a motel by the highway, he said. I had $63 yesterday. Hannah's eyes did not leave his face. I bought diapers, cough syrup, and gas for a man who promised to take us as far as Columbia Falls. He left us at the church when the road closed. That's not my doing. No, sir, I didn't make the storm. No, sir, I didn't put you out. At that, something changed in her face. The tiredness did not leave. The shame did not leave, but a hard line appeared underneath both. No, she said. Brent Callahan did that. But if my boy stops breathing under your pines, Mr. Mercer, the mountain won't care whose doing it was. She knew his name. Of course she did. Everyone within 50 miles knew the burned-out SEAL with the old war dog and the cabin no one visited unless sent by the county, and even then only once. Caleb stepped back. Not to let her in. To shut the door. He saw Hannah understand it before he moved. She nodded once, as if she had expected nothing else, and had only come to make sure hope was dead before burying it. Thank you for answering, she said. That nearly undid him, that blasted thank you. She turned, guiding Maddie toward the pines, where the wind had carved a shallow hollow beside a fallen spruce. The sled lurched, The saucepan clanged once under the rope, a thin, ridiculous note swallowed by snow. Caleb closed the door. The latch caught. The cabin went warm around him again, but the warmth had changed. It sat on his skin like someone else's coat. Atlas stood facing the door. "Don't," Caleb said. Atlas did. The dog threw his shoulder against the door so hard the frame shuddered. "Atlas, Platz!" The German Shepherd looked at him, heard the command, judged the situation, and declined. He pawed the handle. Caleb grabbed his collar. Atlas twisted out with the offended grace of a veteran who had served under worse leadership. Caleb cursed low and inventive. The baby coughed outside, a small tearing sound that somehow made it through the logs, the storm, the door, and 3 years of Caleb's practiced silence. He reached for Atlas again. Atlas opened his mouth, not to bite, never that, but to take Caleb's sleeve between his teeth, the way he had once pulled him away from an unstable wall. Then the dog let go, turned, and hit the door a third time. The old latch, which Caleb had meant to fix since October, gave with a crack. Cold burst in. Atlas launched through the gap and down the steps into the storm. "Atlas!" Caleb shouted. The dog did not look back. He ran to the hollow by the spruce where Hannah was trying to tip the sled on its side for a windbreak. Maddie stood shaking beside her, and Hannah had laid the baby under her coat while she fought the rope with numb fingers. Atlas circled once, nosed under the coat, and then did the one thing Caleb had not trained him to do, but should have expected from a creature with more sense than pride. The old canine lay down in the snow, pressed his warm body along the baby's bundle, tucked his head close to Eli's chest, and stayed. Hannah froze. Maddie whispered something Caleb could not hear. Caleb stood in his doorway with the storm entering his house and his dog disobeying him in full view of God and Montana. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Atlas lifted his head from the child and looked back at Caleb, and in that look was no pleading at all. Only the plain report of a working dog who had found a casualty and was waiting for his handler to remember who he was. The snow thickened after midnight until Caleb Mercer could no longer tell where his porch ended and the yard began, and the pines beyond the cabin bent under white weight like old men trying not to kneel. The door hung half open where Atlas had broken the lazy latch, and cold poured across the floorboards in a shining sheet. Caleb stood with one hand on the frame, boots planted in the warmth he had kept for himself, staring at the German Shepherd lying in the snow beside a stranger's baby. The dog had his head low and his body curved along the bundle, sable fur already crusting, white eyes fixed on Caleb with a patience that felt almost cruel. Behind Atlas, Hannah Pierce crouched beside the sled, one hand under the baby's blanket, the other on her daughter's shoulder. Maddie stood as still as a fence post, her lips blue at the edges, her gaze moving between Caleb and the dog, as if she had just seen one adult refuse mercy and one animal offer it without omitting a sermon or a receipt. "Atlas!" Caleb called. His voice came out rough and flat, the voice that had once crossed radio static and made frightened men obey. Atlas did not move. He blinked once. Caleb stepped onto the porch, and the storm hit his face hard enough to sting the old scar along his jaw. His left knee hated the first stare. It hated the second worse. Pain flared, familiar and bright. "Heal," he said. Atlas pressed closer to Eli. Hannah looked up, and there was no triumph in her face, no accusation either. That made it worse. She only looked tired in the way people look when even their fear has begun to freeze. "He knows," she said. "Your dog knows something's wrong." Caleb wanted to tell her his dog knew a lot of things, including how to find explosives packed under road dust and how to drag a man by the webbing of his vest when that man was too stupid to admit he was bleeding. He wanted to say Atlas was old and stiff in the hips and had no business lying in snow for a woman who would be gone by morning. He wanted to say many things. Instead, the baby coughed, and every word left him. The cough was not loud. That was the problem. Loud meant fight. Loud meant lungs with enough strength to complain. This was a small inward tear, a sound that folded back into the child's chest and stayed there. Caleb moved before deciding to. He crossed the yard with snow climbing over the tops of his boots, his bad knee punching fire up his thigh, and dropped to one knee beside the bundle. The cold came through his jeans at once. He ignored it. The baby was 15 months maybe, cheeks windburned, lashes rimed with melted ice, breathing shallow and fast. Caleb slipped 2 fingers under the blanket at the child's neck. Skin cold, not dead cold. There was a difference, and Caleb knew it too well. "How long has he been coughing?" "Since yesterday morning," Hannah said. The cold made it worse. "Fever?" "Maybe. He was hot this afternoon, then he got quiet." Caleb swore under his breath, not at her, not exactly. Quiet babies scared him more than screaming ones. He unzipped his field jacket, pulled the thermal liner free, and wrapped it around Eli. Then opened the emergency pouch he kept clipped inside the porch box because the habit of preparing for disaster outlived almost every other habit. Mylar blanket, chemical warm packs, gloves. He tore 2 warm packs open with his teeth and shook them hard. "Not against the skin," he said. "Under the outer blanket, sides of the body, not chest, not face. He needs gradual heat." Hannah's hands moved clumsily, numb from cold. "I can do it. Your fingers aren't working." He did it himself, quick but gentle, and the gentleness startled him enough that he nearly pulled back. Atlas shifted to make room, then put his muzzle over Eli's covered feet as if supervising a recruit. "Show off," Caleb muttered. Maddie made a tiny sound. It might have been a laugh, but the wind took it. Caleb looked at the girl. Can you walk?" Maddie did not answer. Hannah said, "She can't. I asked her." The child's chin lifted. "Yes." "Good. Walk to the porch. Slow. If you fall, stay down and yell. Don't try to be brave about it. Brave people make paperwork." Hannah stared at him, and despite the storm, despite the blue around her mouth, something in her eyes flickered. "Is that your medical opinion?" "It's my paperwork opinion. Move." He took Eli in both arms. The baby weighed almost nothing under the layers, a terrible lightness, and Caleb felt the old machinery wake inside him. Assess, warm, airway, shelter, fluids later, panic never, grief never during the work. Hannah reached for the sled rope, but Caleb shook his head. "Leave it. Everything we own is on that sled. Then it won't run off. The saucepan might make a break for it." The words came out of her mouth before she seemed to know she was saying them. Caleb glanced at her, a woman half-frozen homeless carrying a sick child, and still she had enough edge left to mock a saucepan. That was not nothing. "Atlas," Caleb said. "Guard." The dog stood at once and positioned himself between the sled and the road, proud as a statue and twice as stubborn. Caleb carried Eli up the steps. Hannah followed with Maddie tucked under one arm, guiding the girl as if her own legs were not shaking. Inside the cabin swallowed them in heat and shadow. It smelled of cedar smoke coffee, gone bitter old wool gun oil locked away, and the faint, clean animal smell of Atlas. Caleb kicked the door shut as best he could. The broken latch bounced. "Of course," he said. He nudged a chair under the handle. Hannah stood just inside the doorway, dripping snow onto the boards, not daring to step farther. Maddie clung to her coat. "Boots off," Caleb said. "By the stove. Wet socks, too." Hannah flushed. "Sir, I don't want to put bare feet on your floor." "My floor has survived worse than feet. We can stay right here. You can freeze right there if you want. The boy can't." He nodded toward the stove. "Move." There it was again. The command. Voice, useful and ugly. Hannah obeyed, but he saw the way she lowered her head, the old habit of a person who had been corrected by too many people who enjoyed it. He hated that, because he had caused it without meaning to. Caleb laid Eli on the braided rug near the stove, far enough from the heat not to shock cold skin, close enough to warm the air around him. He pulled the medical kit from under the bench and set it open. Thermometer, stethoscope, pediatric acetaminophen expired by 8 months but still better than prayer alone. Nasal aspirator left from Sophie. His hand stopped when he saw the small yellow bulb. For a second, the room changed. Sophie at 2, furious with a runny nose declaring him a nose thief. Rebecca laughing from the doorway. The cabin bright. The porch light on. The little room upstairs unlocked. Caleb's fingers closed around the bulb until his knuckles hurt. "Mr. Mercer?" Hannah's voice was careful. Too careful. Caleb set the aspirator down. "Caleb," he said, "if you're going to bleed snow melt onto my rug, you can call me Caleb." "Hannah," she answered, though he already knew it. She stripped off Maddie's boots and wet newspaper came out with them in gray lumps. Caleb saw that. He saw the split toe wrapped in duct tape. He saw the girl's socks, thin cotton one with a hole at the heel. He got up, went to the chest by the stairs and pulled out 2 pairs of thick wool socks. One gray one, red with tiny white trees. Sophie's Christmas socks. He had not meant to take those. His hand had chosen before his mind caught up. He stood with them too long. Hannah noticed. Of course she did. Women who had lost homes learned to notice what objects cost. "We don't need," she began. "I didn't ask." He handed the gray pair to Hannah and the red pair to Maddie. The girl looked at the little white trees. Her fingers closed around them slowly. "They're too nice. They're socks. Nice socks. They don't know that." Maddie looked up at him, wary, almost offended by the joke. Atlas chose that moment to shoulder the door open with the sled rope in his mouth and drag half the outside world into the entry. Snow blew around him. Behind him came the red sled bumping over the threshold, saucepan clanging like a church bell that had lost its mind. Caleb stared. Hannah stared. Maddie stared. Atlas dropped the rope, shook snow across the room, and sat down with the solemn satisfaction of a dog who had solved logistics. "That," Caleb said, "was not guard." Atlas sneezed. Hannah pressed one hand to her mouth. It was not a laugh exactly. It was the ghost of one, thin and surprised. Caleb closed the door again, wedged the chair harder under the handle, and pointed at Atlas. "You're insubordinate." The dog lifted one paw. Maddie whispered, "He brought our pan. Apparently he values cookware. Daddy said a good pan is family." The words landed and changed the air. Maddie looked down at the socks and shut her mouth as if she had said too much. Caleb worked on Eli for the next hour while the storm worked on the cabin. Hannah held the baby upright when Caleb told her to. She rubbed his back in circles, slow and steady, while Caleb listened to the child's lungs. Congestion. Wheeze. Not hospital level if the warmth held and the fever broke, but close enough that his skin prickled. He radioed Mara Quinn on the county emergency band. Static answered first, then Mara's voice clipped and tired. "Mercer, tell me that is you and not the mountain developing a personality. I have a sick toddler at my cabin. Hannah Pierce, 2 kids, came up from the church." A pause. "Lord Caleb, we lost track of her after the shelter filled. Roads are closed below mile marker 9. No ambulance gets to you tonight." "I know. Can you manage?" He looked at Eli, at Hannah's raw hands, at Maddie sitting rigid in red socks by the stove, at Atlas lying with his head on the sled rope as if daring anyone to remove it. "For tonight?" Mara heard what he did not say. She always did. "Keep the radio on. And Caleb," "What?" "Porch light." His throat tightened. "What about it?" "If the snow lets up, my volunteer may try to spot your place from below. Turn the porch light on." Caleb looked at the dark window. 3 years. 3 years of keeping that light off because Rebecca had once said she could always find her way home by it. And after she did not come home, the light had become an insult, a promise that failed. "Caleb," Mara said, softer now, "turn it on." He ended the call without answering. Hannah watched him but did not ask. That restraint was another dangerous thing about her. Caleb could handle questions. Silence gave him too much room. He crossed to the wall switch by the door. His hand hovered there. In the reflection of the window, he saw himself, broad-shouldered, gray-eyed, older than 43 in all the ways that mattered. He saw Atlas watching. He saw Maddie holding Sophie's socks around her ankles. He saw Hannah with Eli against her chest lips, moving in a prayer so quiet it barely disturbed the air. Caleb flipped the switch. Outside, the porch light came on, weak and gold, cutting a small, trembling circle into the snow. It did not save anyone by itself. It did not forgive him. It did not bring back the car, the ditch, the missed calls, the tiny coat. It only shone. Sometimes that was the first job of mercy. Near the stove, Eli gave one thin cry, the first real cry since he had entered the cabin. Hannah's face broke open with relief so sudden it looked like pain. Caleb turned from the window and saw the baby's mouth moving, angry, now alive enough to protest the world. He stepped toward them, meaning to check his temperature again, meaning to do the next useful thing. Then Eli's cry caught, stopped, and became a strange, shallow gasp that made Atlas surge to his feet. Hannah looked at Caleb with all the blood gone from her face, and Caleb heard himself say very calmly, "Give him to me now." The storm pressed against the cabin before dawn, and the glass in the kitchen windows trembled as if the dark outside had put both hands on the house and meant to come in. Caleb Mercer took Eli Pierce from his mother and dropped to one knee beside the stove, not because the gesture was graceful, but because the bad knee gave out halfway, and pride had no medical value. The baby's gasp came again, thin, high, wrong. Hannah made a sound behind her teeth. Maddie stood up too fast and nearly stepped into the open medical kit. Atlas moved between the girl and the chaos, not touching her, just blocking the worst of it with his body. "Hannah," Caleb said, and the old command voice returned hard enough to hold on to. "Look at me." She did, barely. "He's breathing, not well, but breathing. I need steam, not boiling on him, just in the room, kettle on, then run the shower hot in the bathroom and leave the door open. The pipes will hate us, let them." She moved. That saved her. Work saved many people before comfort could find its boots. Caleb sat Eli upright against his chest, one hand supporting the child's head, the other rubbing small circles between the shoulder blades. The boy's ribs fluttered under the blanket. Not blue, now. Not good, either. Caleb angled him forward, listening. "Come on, little man," he murmured. "Don't get lazy. Lazy is paperwork." Maddie stared at him. "You said brave people make paperwork." "So do lazy people." "Who doesn't?" Caleb cleared Eli's nose with the old yellow aspirator and did not let himself think of Sophie shouting "thief" at him from the same rug. "Dogs," he said. "Dogs create incidents, different category." Atlas sneezed exactly once, as if objecting to the classification. Maddie's face moved almost a smile, then locked again. The kettle began to tick on the stove. The bathroom pipes groaned awake like something buried and annoyed. Hannah came back with her sleeves pushed up, hair stuck wet to her temples, and no more apology in her posture. "What now? Now you sit behind me and hold the blanket around us. Keep the warm air close, not tight around his face." She sat without arguing back against Caleb's shoulder arms, reaching around to tent the blanket. Her hands were shaking. So were his. They pretended not to notice together. By the time the first gray light seeped through the storm, Eli's breathing had settled into something that still worried Caleb, but no longer sounded like a door closing. The fever had climbed, then eased half a degree. The steam fogged the lower windows, and every surface in the cabin seemed damp. Socks hung from chairbacks, mittens lay on the hearth. Hannah's mismatched gloves dripped into a tin pie plate. Maddie's duct-taped boot leaned sideways by the stove as if it had died bravely in service. Beside it sat Caleb's military boots. Hannah's too thin pair, Maddie's ruined ones, and the tiny soft shoes Eli had not worn because they were no match for Montana. 4 sets, more or less. Caleb noticed the line they made and looked away. It was only a K of wet boots, if a man wanted to call it that. A tray, a nuisance, evidence. He had built that boot tray himself the first winter after the funeral, because snowmelt used to run everywhere when Rebecca and Sophie came in from sledding, laughing, shedding scarves and mittens like molting birds. After they died, he kept the tray by the stove because moving it seemed theatrical, and Caleb distrusted theatrical grief. Now the tray had filled again, while he was not watching. Hannah sat on the floor, with Eli asleep against her collarbone, her own eyes closed but not sleeping. Mothers did that, Caleb had learned in a previous life. They slept with one door open inside them. Maddie sat under the table with Sophie's red socks on her feet, knees pulled to her chest, watching Atlas. The German shepherd lay 6 feet away, pretending not to notice, which meant he noticed every blink. Caleb poured coffee into a chipped mug and put it on the floor near Hannah. "Drink." Her eyes opened. "I can make my own." "I didn't say you couldn't. You don't have to serve me. It's coffee, not a pension." She looked at him for a long second, then took the mug with both hands. "Thank you." He grunted, which was not quite "you're welcome," but had served him in several countries. She drank and winced. "This is strong." "It's coffee." "It tastes like it was raised by wolves." "It was raised by seals. Wolves have standards." The corner of her mouth moved, a small thing. In that dim cabin it felt indecently bright. When Eli woke angry and hungry, Caleb took it as excellent news and pretended not to. Hannah fed him bits of softened bread dipped in broth while Maddie watched the spoon travel from bowl to baby with the strict attention of a banker. Caleb opened 2 cans of soup and a sleeve of crackers from the emergency shelf. The crackers were stale. He declared them vintage. Maddie not laughed but took one when Hannah nodded. She ate in small, controlled bites as if speed might make the food disappear. Atlas, who had once ignored steak during training because Caleb had told him to, placed his rubber ball at Maddie's feet and backed away. The ball was orange, scarred by teeth and ridiculous. Maddie stared at it. "Is he giving it to me?" "No," Caleb said. "He's conducting an evaluation." "Of what?" "Whether you throw like a civilian." Maddie touched the ball with one finger, then pulled back. "I don't throw things in houses. Good policy." Atlas nudged the ball closer. Hannah watched from the hearth, Eli half asleep in her lap. "Atlas," Caleb warned. The dog looked at him and then at Maddie, clearly choosing the child as the more promising command structure. Maddie picked up the ball and rolled it not far, just from under the table to the edge of the rug. Atlas rose, fetched it, and returned it with great ceremony. He placed it exactly where it had been. Maddie did not smile, but her shoulders lowered by half an inch. Caleb saw it. Hannah saw him seeing it. For a moment they shared that small, careful knowledge and said nothing, because speaking over a child's first thaw would have been like stepping on thin ice just to hear it crack. Later, when Eli slept again, Hannah rose stiffly and reached for the broom without being asked. "You should rest," Caleb said. "If I rest, I'll think. Thinking is survivable, not always." He had no answer for that. She swept the floor, cleaned the soup pot, wiped the table, stacked firewood from the indoor rack, and then when the stove sputtered, knelt to adjust the damper with a competence that made him narrow his eyes. You've done that before. Trailer stove had opinions. Most stoves do. Luke said every machine has a personality if it's old enough. Her voice changed on the name. Not broke, changed. Caleb waited. She did not continue. He did not ask. By late morning, the radio crackled with Mara's update. Roads closed, shelter full, another cell of storm coming down from the ridge. No safe transport until plows cleared the lower route, and that could be tomorrow or the day after if the wind behaved, which wind rarely did when anyone needed manners from it. Hannah stood near the table while Caleb listened. Her face emptied in a way he recognized. People think bad news arrives like a blow. Often it arrives like math. Too many miles, too little fuel, too few beds, too much cold. Copy, Caleb told Mara. They can remain overnight. He heard the sentence after he said it and disliked how official it sounded. If that's acceptable, Hannah said quickly. I don't want you thinking I said they can remain. We can sleep by the stove. There's a couch. We'll use the floor. The couch has survived Atlas. It can survive you. Atlas thumped his tail without lifting his head. Hannah looked toward the door. My things inside. Not all of them. Caleb followed her gaze to the sled near the entry. A canvas tool roll lay half under a trash bag, wet at the edges. He picked it up. Tools. Luke's. You carry tools before clothes? Clothes don't fix a broken heater. That answer pleased him against his will. He unrolled the canvas on the table. Wrenches, pliers, a folding knife, 2 screwdrivers, electrical tape, wire cutters, a small level. All worn, but cared for. At the end was a carpenter's pencil shaved by hand. Hannah touched it once, then stopped herself. He was good with his hands, she said. At Callahan Lumber, mostly roofs, repairs. Whatever Brent needed done, cheap and fast. How did he die? She went still. He fell through a section of roof they all knew was soft. Brent said Luke hadn't clipped his harness right. Maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. Dead men don't get to correct paperwork. Caleb felt that sentence settle in him. Dead men don't get to correct paperwork. He thought of casualty reports, clean lines, times of death summaries, of events that made chaos look organized. He put the tools back with more care than he had opened them. I'm sorry, he said, and hated the poverty of it. Hannah looked surprised, as if the words had come from behind him. Thank you. Then she seemed to remember herself. I can work while we're here, I mean it. I don't take charity. Caleb glanced at the wet boots, the steaming socks, the little girl under the table rolling Atlas's ball 2 inches farther each time, the baby breathing better because a stubborn dog had disobeyed a broken man. Charity. People used that word when they wanted mercy, to stand in a corner and look embarrassed. Generator's been coughing, he said. Shed doors iced over, woodpile needs digging, kitchen vent sticks when the temperature drops below 10. You fix any of that, we'll call it trade. Hannah's relief came so quickly she had to look down. I can try. Trying is where repair bills come from. Then I can succeed modestly. Caleb blinked. Atlas wagged his tail. Maddie from under the table whispered, Mom fixes things better when people doubt her. That's so? Caleb asked. Hannah gave her daughter a look. Maddie retreated behind the ball. Useful trait, Caleb said. The day folded into chores, fever checks radio static, and the strange embarrassment of people occupying the same room without yet knowing where to put their eyes. Hannah fixed the vent with Luke's screwdriver and a piece of wire from Caleb's junk drawer. She got the generator shed open by pouring warm water along the hinge and tapping the ice with the patience of someone who knew force was expensive. Caleb stood nearby with a shovel, pretending to supervise, while mostly making sure she did not slip. Atlas supervised both of them and stole one of Caleb's socks from the indoor rack, carrying it under the bench with the grave secrecy of a classified operation. Maddie saw him do it. Caleb saw Maddie see it. "Contraband," he said. She looked at the bench. "Are you going to arrest him?" "Military dogs fall under a complicated jurisdiction." "What's jurisdiction?" "A word adults use when they don't want to solve something." That earned the smallest sound from her nose, not a laugh, a crack in the ice. Evening came early, blue and heavy. Hannah made broth richer with powdered milk and the last of Caleb's onions. Eli ate, coughed, slept. Maddie sat close enough to the stove that her cheeks turned pink, but not close enough to Caleb to suggest trust. When the plates were washed and the wood stacked, Caleb found Hannah by the entry packing the sled again. For a second he did not understand what he was seeing. She had folded the blanket, tied the saucepan down, rolled the toolkit tight. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Morning might be clear. Mara said roads won't be. If the lower road opens, we should go before we become a problem. You are already a problem." Hannah's hand stopped. Caleb heard his own words and closed his eyes briefly. "I mean that as a logistical fact, not a moral judgment. That's comforting. I'm bad at comfort, I noticed." She tied the rope with numb precision. "You gave us the night. More than that, you kept Eli breathing." "I won't mistake rescue for an invitation." The sentence hit him harder than it should have. An open door was not the same as an invitation. He had not said stay. He had said remain overnight. He had said trade. He had said everything except what would cost him. Hannah lifted Eli. Maddie took the red socks off and folded them on the chair with heartbreaking care, and Caleb stood beside the boot tray, feeling fear rise in him, sudden and physical. Not fear of danger, he knew that shape. This was fear of warmth, leaving, after reminding a room what it had been built for. Outside, the wind dropped for one quiet minute. In that quiet, the porch light hummed above the door, still on, still making its small circle in the snow. Caleb looked at the socks on the chair, at the sled rope in Hannah's hand, at Atlas standing between her and the door with his ears back. The dog growled, not at Hannah, but at Caleb, low and disgusted. Caleb drew a breath to order him aside. Instead, the baby coughed. Maddie flinched, and Hannah reached for the handle. Caleb heard himself say, "Nothing at all." Morning came to North Fork Road without much light in it. Only a gray loosening of the dark behind the pines and the steady hiss of snow sliding off the cabin roof in heavy sheets. Caleb Mercer stood by the door with one hand on the chair he had wedged under the broken latch, watching Hannah Pierce gather the last of her life onto the red sled. Eli slept against her chest, feverish but breathing better. Maddie had put her ruined boots back on and stood beside the sled with Sophie's red socks folded in both hands, offering them to Caleb as if returning borrowed silver. Atlas blocked the threshold, not dramatically. He simply sat in the center of the entry rug, wide chest forward, tail wrapped around his paws, the old canine, expressionless in the way German shepherds become expressionless when they have decided the humans are making a mistake and should be allowed to discover it slowly. "Move," Caleb told him. Atlas did not. Hannah looked down at the dog. "He doesn't seem to agree with your checkout policy." Caleb's jaw twitched. "He is in management. He broke your door, dragged my sled inside, and kept my son warm in a blizzard. He may at least be assistant manager." Maddie made a tiny sound behind her mitten. Caleb looked at the girl. She looked immediately at the floor. The laugh vanished, but not before it had existed. That small sound put a hand around Caleb's throat more effectively than any speech could have. He had heard Sophie laugh in that room. He had heard Rebecca tell him not to look so proud of himself when he made the child giggle with jokes too dry for kindergarten. He had spent 3 years making the cabin quiet enough that memory had nothing fresh to hook onto. Now a widow and 2 children had been inside less than 36 hours, and already the house had begun betraying him, finding old uses for corners and cups and socks. Hannah lifted the sled rope.
We'll head down as soon as the wind drops.
If the road is still closed, we'll wait near the church. Maybe someone with a plow. The road is still closed, Caleb said. You don't know that. I know what wind does on that bend. Then we'll go slow. That's not a plan. That's a way to make search and rescue resent your optimism. Hannah's chin came up, pride pulling her face tight, though her eyes were ringed dark from a night without sleep. I told you I wouldn't mistake rescue for an invitation. I remember. Then don't make it harder. I'm not. You are standing in front of the door with a dog who appears prepared to unionize. Atlas thumped his tail once. Caleb exhaled through his nose. There were simple sentences available to other people. Stay. I need help. The boy is not well enough. The storm is not done. I do not want the cabin to go quiet yet. Caleb could fast rope into black water, stitch a wound with cold fingers, red wind off snowfields, identify the lie in a man's breathing before the man spoke. He could not say, stay, to a woman who had already lost too much to men with authority over doors. So he did what he had done his whole life when language failed. He made a list. He stepped past Atlas onto the porch. The cold bit through his shirt and made his knees stiffen. He pointed toward the shed, barely visible beyond a swollen drift. Generator still running rough. Carburetor probably has ice in the line, maybe bad fuel. I can fix it, but crawling under that shelf with this knee will make me invent language your daughter shouldn't hear. Hannah blinked. He pointed to the right side of the roof. Gutter's packed. If that dam backs up, meltwater gets into the wall. I haven't cleared it because ladders and snow are a partnership designed by idiots. Maddie's eyes moved to the roof. Caleb pointed toward the woodpile. Half the split wood is under 3 feet. I need it moved closer before tonight. Barrels in the shed need water in case the pipe freezes. The latch on this door is broken because my assistant manager has boundary issues. Bathroom window leaks, kitchen vent sticks, propane tank needs dragging from the back lean-to. There's a deadfall across the snowmobile track if Mara tries to come up. Also,
Atlas needs someone to tell him he's not in charge. I have failed in that area. Hannah stared at him, the sled rope still in her hand. Snow gathered on Caleb's hair. He did not look at her directly. Directly was dangerous. Instead, he looked at the boot tray beside the stove, empty now except for his own boots and the watermarks left by hers. One person can do it, he said, badly. 4 people and 1 insubordinate dog can do it better.
4, Hannah said. Eli mostly drools. Morale function. Maddie is 6. Quality control. 6-year-olds notice everything wrong and announce it without mercy. Maddie looked up to spite herself. Caleb kept his face solemn. That is a critical billet. Hannah's mouth trembled again with that almost laugh that kept reaching her and losing courage. And me. You can fix old machines and insult cookware. Useful in a mountain emergency. That's an invitation. The word invitation hung between them, warmer than the stove and more dangerous than the cold. Caleb looked at the porch light still burning pale gold above the door, though the morning made it unnecessary. His throat worked. It's a work agreement, he said. Coward, he thought. Hannah seemed to hear the thought anyway. She looked past him to the pines where they had nearly slept through the night, to the road hidden under blown snow, to the baby on her chest whose breath rasped lightly but steadily. Then she looked at Maddie. What do you think? Maddie held the folded red socks against her coat. Her eyes went to Atlas. The dog leaned forward an inch, ears pricked, shamelessly campaigning. His dog wants us to stay, she said. His dog steals socks. Maybe he needs more. Caleb felt the sentence like a nail going into soft wood. Hannah closed her eyes briefly, perhaps to pray, perhaps to keep from crying, perhaps both. Until the road opens, she said, and until Eli's fever is gone. Caleb nodded. Until then, in trade. No pity. Can't afford it. Spent my last pity on the gutter. That did it. Hannah laughed once, a short broken sound that embarrassed her immediately. Atlas stood, seized the sled rope, and dragged the sled back toward the stove, as if the agreement had been properly ratified. The saucepan clanged against the chair. Caleb pointed at him. "You're demoted," Maddie whispered. "Assistant to the manager." Caleb looked at her. She went pink and hid her face in Hannah's coat. But the words had come out. That mattered. The rest of the day became labor, and labor was safer than feeling. Hannah changed out of her wet parka into one of Caleb's old fleece jackets, the sleeves rolled 4 times. She tied her hair with a strip of cloth and attacked the generator shed like a woman who had personal history with uncooperative machinery. Caleb stood beside her with a flashlight, offering tools she did not ask for and commentary she did not appreciate. "That screw strip's easy," he said. "It will if you keep discouraging it. Machines don't respond to encouragement. No wonder yours are sulking." He grunted. She cleaned the fuel line, drained water from the bowl, and found a cracked hose Caleb had missed because he had inspected it with the impatience of a man angry at needing equipment at all. "You got spare hose?" she asked. "Coffee can, second shelf." She reached without looking and found it. Caleb watched her hands chapped raw, competent, moving through a strange shed, as if the world had always been made of broken things she was expected to persuade. Luke's tool roll lay open on the bench. She used his wire cutters, his tape, his old pencil tucked behind her ear. Caleb did not ask whether using those tools comforted her or hurt. Some questions are knives pretending to be keys. When the generator coughed back to a cleaner rhythm, Hannah stepped away, wiped grease across her cheek, and looked almost offended by her own success. Caleb said, "Modest." She turned. "What?" "You said you could succeed modestly." She looked at the generator. "That was at least medium. Don't get reckless." She smiled then. Not wide, not free, but real enough that Caleb had to look at the snowmobile track behind them. Maddie stood on the porch, with Atlas, holding a broom like a staff. Caleb had assigned her the official job of keeping Eli entertained and reporting structural concerns. She had found 3. A loose stair, a cracked mug, Atlas's suspicious possession of a gray sock. "Report," Caleb called. Maddie stiffened at being addressed, then spoke with grave precision. "The baby is asleep. Atlas is chewing nothing. The stove made a noise like a stomach. The window by the sink has ice teeth." "Ice teeth?" "On the inside." Caleb nodded. "Good catch." Maddie looked startled, as if adults did not usually value her reports unless something had already gone wrong. By afternoon, Hannah and Caleb had cleared enough wood for 2 days, dragged the propane tank to the side wall, braced the broken latch, and shoveled a narrow trench from porch to shed. Eli's fever dipped. Maddie kept her distance from Caleb, but followed Atlas everywhere, copying hand signals from 3 yards away. Sit, down, stay. She learned stay fast and used it on the dog with such solemn authority that Atlas obeyed her longer than he obeyed Caleb. "He's humoring you," Caleb said from the woodpile. "No, sir," Maddie answered before remembering to be afraid of him. "He's listening." Hannah glanced at Caleb over the shovel handle, eyebrows raised. Caleb lifted both hands. "I stand corrected." Atlas, lying in the snow with his paws crossed, looked smug. Near dusk, the storm eased enough for the mountains to appear as darker shadows behind the clouds. Caleb brought in another armload of wood and stopped in the doorway. The boot tray was full again. His military boots, Hannah's cracked brown boots, Maddie's duct-taped pair, Eli's useless soft shoes drying near the edge, and Atlas's wet paw prints stamped all around because no tray in the world could contain Atlas. Water pooled under them. Steam rose faintly. A house could be measured by what waited beside the door. For 3 years, Caleb's tray had held one pair of boots and sometimes a towel for the dog. Now it looked like an argument for staying alive. He stood there too long. Hannah, kneeling by Eli near the stove, noticed but said nothing. That was becoming her most dangerous kindness. She knew when not to rescue a man from what he needed to see. Supper was canned beans stretched with broth and onions. Maddie ate more than she had the night before. Eli slapped the table with a cracker and laughed, startling everyone, including himself. Atlas seized the moment to steal the cracker, then looked deeply betrayed when Caleb took it back. "War hero," Caleb said. "Reduced to petty theft."
Hannah wiped Eli's chin.
"Maybe he considers it salvage." "That dog has salvaged 3 socks, 1 pan, and my reputation against my will." "Then he's efficient."
After supper, Hannah washed the bowls while Caleb split kindling just outside the open door, close enough to hear the children and far enough to pretend he needed the cold. Maddie appeared on the porch with Atlas beside her. She had put the red socks back on inside her boots, though she had not asked permission, and Caleb made a point of not noticing. The sky had lowered again, purple-gray snow beginning in small, dry grains.
"Mr. Mercer," she said. "Caleb, Mom says I should call grown-ups by their last name unless they say different." "I said different." She considered that. "Caleb." The name came from her carefully, like a cup filled too high. "How old is Atlas?" Caleb set the hatchet down. There it was. He could feel the road ahead of that question, and he did not want to walk it. 8. Is that old for a dog? Not ancient, but old. Atlas sat between them, tongue slightly out, unconcerned by mortality as long as someone remained available to admire him. Caleb leaned the hatchet against the rail. Old enough to know better, young enough to ignore it. Maddie looked at the dog's torn ear, the gray at his muzzle, the scar above his eye. She did not reach for him. "My daddy died," she said. No warning. Children did that. They opened the deepest door in the plainest hallway. "I know. My grandma died too. I'm sorry." People say that. They do. It doesn't fix it. No. The snow ticked softly against Caleb's sleeves. Maddie's hands disappeared into her coat pockets. "Atlas is going to die." Caleb looked at the dog. Atlas looked back, offended not by the topic but by the lack of snacks. "Someday. You too." The word struck with a clean, small force. "Someday," Caleb said. Maddie's chin trembled, but her eyes stayed dry with the awful discipline of a child who had made rules against tears. "Then I don't want to pet him. And I don't want to like you. Because then I'll have to know another name that goes away." Caleb had been shot at by men who meant it. He had watched rotor wash whip dust over the wounded. He had stepped over things no human being should have to step over and kept moving because stopping was how more people died. None of that prepared him for a 6-year-old in duct-taped boots, explaining grief as if it were a chore she had been assigned too young. He opened his mouth. Nothing useful came. Atlas rose, walked to Maddie, and sat just beyond her reach, not pushing, not begging, only present. Caleb lowered himself onto the porch step, the bad knee stiff, the cold biting through his jeans. "Maddie," he said, "that's a fair reason." She looked at him, then surprised by fairness. "It is?" "Yes." "Mom says fear lies." Sometimes. Sometimes fear tells the truth, but not the whole truth." She frowned. "What's the whole truth?" Caleb looked at Atlas, at the porch light burning above them, at the boot tray inside the door with 4 pairs of shoes melting onto the wood. His voice came quieter. "The whole truth is, loving somebody does give grief a place to find you." Maddie swallowed. See, and not loving anybody doesn't stop grief. It just makes sure you're alone when it comes. She looked away fast, angry at him, maybe, or at the world for being built that way. I already lost 2, she said. I don't get another one taken. She turned and ran inside before he could answer, red socks flashing above ruined boots. Atlas took one step after her, then stopped and looked back at Caleb. Inside, Hannah's low voice asked what happened, and Maddie's answer came muffled, sharp with tears she still refused to spend. Caleb sat in the snow-dusted dark, feeling the words settle in his chest like ice water. He had thought the child was afraid of death. He understood now she was afraid of doors, the kind people opened just wide enough to let love in, and loss behind it. Above him, the porch light flickered once, stayed lit, and Caleb realized with a slow, sick certainty that the next locked room he would have to open was not downstairs at all. Snow fell again before midnight. Softer now, less like a siege and more like someone covering evidence, and the cabin near Whitefish settled into the old groans of timber and wind. Caleb Mercer did not sleep. He sat in the chair by the stove after Hannah and the children had gone quiet on the couch and the braided rug, listening to Eli's uneven but steadier breathing, to Maddie's occasional turn under the blanket, to Atlas's metal tag making its small tick whenever the dog lifted his head to check the room. The porch light burned outside, and its gold trembled through the frost on the window. Caleb kept telling himself he had left it on for Mara Quinn, for visibility, for safety, practical reasons. He had built much of his life out of practical reasons stacked high enough to hide behind. Yet every time the light hummed, he remembered Maddie saying she did not want to learn another name that went away. He remembered Sophie asking him at 5 years old whether soldiers ever got scared and how he had told her yes if they were smart. Sophie had considered that with a crayon tucked behind one ear and said, "Then you must be very smart, Daddy." He had laughed then. He could still hear Rebecca laughing from the sink, telling him not to let it go to his head. The memory arrived whole, bright, cruelly ordinary. Caleb stood so fast his knee buckled. Atlas lifted his head. Hannah stirred from the couch but did not wake. Caleb crossed the room, took the flashlight from the peg by the stairs, and started up. Each stair had its own voice. 3rd from the bottom, a creak. 5th, a complaint. 7th, the one Sophie used to skip because she said it sounded like a duck with a secret. Caleb stopped on that stair, hand on the rail, breathing through his teeth. "Don't," he whispered to the house. Houses do not obey. At the top of the stairs, the hallway narrowed under the roofline. One door led to his room, another to the storage closet, and the last door, small and painted white, with a faint row of blue stars along the top, had been locked for 3 years. The key hung from a nail inside Caleb's bedroom, not hidden, which was worse. Hidden things can be claimed as forgotten. This key had watched him every morning. He took it down. His fingers did not want it. That surprised him, although it should not have. Hands can remember what the mouth refuses. He stood before the white door with the flashlight beam shaking over the blue stars. They were crooked. Sophie had painted them herself, kneeling on a towel tongue between her teeth, very serious about the sky. Caleb had offered to help. She had said no, because his stars looked like injured spiders. Rebecca had not disagreed. Behind him, a floorboard moved. Caleb did not turn. "You should be asleep," he said. "So should you," Hannah answered. Her voice was soft, roughened by exhaustion. She stood a few feet back in Caleb's fleece jacket, hair loose around her shoulders, bare feet in gray wool socks. She looked smaller in the hallway than she had in the storm, which made no sense and too much sense at once. "I didn't mean to follow." "Then you're unusually bad at not following." "I heard the stairs." He nodded at the door. "This isn't your problem. No. She waited. That was becoming her way. She did not push, and somehow that gave Caleb less room to run. He tried to fit the key into the lock. Metal scraped metal and missed. His hand shook. He cursed under his breath. "Need a light?" she asked. "I have a light." "Need a witness?" That found him. A witness. Not help, not rescue, not pity. In the teams, a man did not ask whether someone was afraid before entering a room. He asked who had his back. Caleb closed his eyes. "I want to open it myself," he said. The words came out scraped raw. "But I need you behind me." Hannah stepped closer, not touching him. "I'm here." Atlas came up the stairs then, slow because his hips were old, and sat at the top landing with the offended air of a dog who had not been formally invited to an operation he considered his. Caleb looked down at him. "Fine. You too." Atlas's tag ticked once. Caleb put the key in again. Hannah's hand came near his, not over it, just close enough that warmth gathered between them. The lock resisted, then turned with a dry crack that seemed too loud for the hour. The door opened inward, and the smell came out. Dust crayons, old cedar lavender shampoo gone faint in fabric. And under it all, the sweet, stale ghost of a child's room shut too long. Caleb's lungs stopped working right. Hannah reached past him and opened the small window without asking. Cold air spilled in clean and sharp, stirring the curtains where tiny blue whales swam across faded cotton. It was exactly the right thing to do. He could have loved her for that if the thought had not frightened him enough to make him angry. "Cold," he said. "Yes," Hannah answered, "but it lets the room breathe." He had no argument. The flashlight beam moved over a narrow bed with a quilt of yellow squares, a shelf of books, a pair of snow boots outgrown and still muddy at the soles, a jar full of buttons Sophie had called treasure, and a table scattered with crayons, hardened under a film of dust. A pink coat hung from a hook shaped like a moon. Rebecca's scarf lay folded on the chair because she had worn it the night of the pageant, and Caleb had placed it there after the funeral with the awful delicacy of a man handling evidence of a crime. On the floor by the bed sat a wooden sled red runner's rope coiled neatly on top. Caleb stared at it until the flashlight lowered. "I bought that the week before," he said. "Before?" Hannah asked, though she knew. He appreciated that she made him choose whether to say it. "Before the accident. Sophie wanted a sled of her own, not a plastic one, a real one. She said plastic sleds had no dignity." A breath left Hannah almost a laugh and almost a sob. "She sounds opinionated." "She was 6. It's their profession." From the hall, Atlas snorted. Caleb stepped into the room. Dust rose around his boots. He touched the back of the chair, then the scarf. His fingers stopped there. The wool was cold. Everything in the room was cold. He had thought he locked the room to keep it unchanged. Instead, he had locked winter inside it. Hannah knelt by the little table and began picking up crayons one by one, laying them into the tin box, without asking whether she should. Not cleaning, not erasing. Restoring order to what had been abandoned. Caleb watched her hand close around a blue crayon. It broke in two. She looked up, stricken. "I'm sorry." It was already old. Still, Sophie broke most of them on purpose, said short crayons worked harder. Hannah smiled faintly and set both halves in the box. On the shelf, Caleb found the wooden fox Sophie had once painted orange and then abandoned because the tail looked like a carrot. It was not Maddie's fox, the one Luke had carved and she had left behind at the Callahan trailer, but the sight of it turned a key somewhere else in him. "Hannah," he said. "Maddie's doll, or toy. You said she left something." Hannah looked down at the crayons. "A fox. Luke carved it from pine when she was 4. One ear was chipped because Eli got hold of it and used it on the table like a hammer. She slept with it after Luke died. When Brent's man came to say we had to clear out, we packed fast. She saw it on the bunk after the sled was tied. She didn't ask me to untie everything. She just looked at it and climbed in front of Eli so he wouldn't see her face. Caleb rubbed his thumb over Sophie's ugly little fox. Brent still has the trailer. Maybe. Or he cleared it, or burned what was left, I don't know. Her voice flattened. Don't go there. Please.
I don't want trouble with him. Caleb almost said Trouble already knew the road. Instead, he turned the fox in his hand. Cedar in the shed, he said. Dry pieces, good grain. Hannah understood slowly. Caleb, what? You don't have to make her another. I know. It won't be the same. Nothing is. That ended the argument because it was not an argument. By morning, he had slept less than an hour. He spent the rest of the night at the kitchen table with Luke's carpenter pencil, his own old pocket knife, and a block of cedar that smelled warm, even in winter. Hannah woke twice and found him bent over the work, shoulders hunched, knife moving in small, uncertain cuts. Once he hissed when the blade nicked his thumb. She stepped toward him. Don't, he said. I wasn't going to fuss. You were absolutely going to fuss. She put a clean cloth beside his elbow and went back to the couch. Atlas lay under the table, nose on Caleb's boot, guarding the operation from socks, pans, grief, and other threats. The fox took shape badly. One ear sat lower than the other, the legs were uneven, the tail looked less like a foxtail than a spoon with ambition. Caleb nearly threw it into the stove at 3 a.m. Atlas lifted his head and growled at him. I wasn't going to, Caleb lied. At breakfast, when Maddie came in carrying Eli's cup, Caleb set the cedar fox on the table and pushed it toward her. Found some wood, he said. Had time. Maddie stopped. The room stopped with her. Hannah stood very still by the stove. The child looked at the fox, at its uneven ears, at the careful scratch marks where Caleb had tried to make fur, at the small dark dot of blood near one paw where his thumb had betrayed him. It's not his, she said. No. Caleb's voice stayed low. It's not your dad's. It doesn't pretend to be. Maddie's face went hard. Then why did you make it? Because you should not have to leave every loved thing behind, he thought. Because I know what locked rooms do to children even when they are not allowed inside. Because your grief has been standing in my kitchen wearing red socks. What he said was, because this one could come with you. Maddie stared at him, her mouth twisted. For one terrible second he thought she would reject it, and he told himself that would be fair. Then she grabbed the fox, crossed the room in 3 stumbling steps, and threw herself not at the toy, but at Caleb's chest. The impact drove the breath out of him. Her small fists knotted in his flannel. She sobbed with the violence of a child who had stored every cry until her body could not carry them. Caleb held his hands in the air, useless. Hannah covered her mouth, turned toward the sink, and broke silently. Atlas sat up and leaned his heavy body against Caleb's leg. Slowly, as if remembering a language learned before war, before funerals, before locked doors, Caleb lowered his arms around Maddie and held on. The radio on the shelf crackled at that exact moment, Mara's voice cutting through static. Caleb, if you can hear me, Callahan Road is fully blocked and we've got a larger system coming off the ridge. Stay put. Nobody moves unless it's life or death. Maddie cried harder into Caleb's shirt. The cedar fox trapped between them, and Caleb looked over her head at Hannah with his own eyes burning. Outside, the porch light glowed into the new snow, and somewhere beyond that golden circle, a red snowcat engine began to growl up the hidden road. The morning over Whitefish came with a hard glitter in the snow, and a sky the color of unpolished tin, bright enough to hurt the eyes and cold enough to make every sound travel clean. Caleb Mercer heard the engine before anyone else, but Atlas was already at the door, hackles lifting along the black saddle of his back. It was not Mara's county rig. It was not the low churn of a plow either. This was heavier, smugger, a tracked machine chewing the road as if the mountain had been built for its convenience.
Hannah was at the sink washing Eli's spoon when the sound reached the cabin. The spoon slipped from her hand and struck the basin. Maddie, who had been sitting on the floor with the cedar fox in her lap, looked up fast. Some children learn their mother's fear the way other children learn songs. Hannah wiped her hands on Caleb's old fleece jacket and moved toward the window. "Stay back," Caleb said. She did not. She lifted the curtain with 2 fingers and went pale. Brent. The name changed the cabin temperature. Caleb joined her at the window. A red snowcat came into view through the pines, broad-nosed, expensive, absurdly clean for such a road. Behind the glass sat Brent Callahan, thick through the middle, red-faced from warmth rather than weather, wearing a fur-lined hat and the expression of a man who considered a rival an argument already won. He parked near the porch without asking permission, tracks crushing the narrow trench Caleb and Hannah had shoveled from house to shed. Caleb felt an old, clean anger wake low in his body. Useful anger, dangerous if left unattended. Hannah put a hand on Maddie's shoulder. "Take Eli upstairs." Maddie clutched the fox. "Mom, now!" The girl obeyed, but slowly enough to show she understood more than anyone wanted her to. Atlas moved to the door. Caleb reached for his collar, then stopped. "Heel," he said. This time Atlas obeyed because they agreed on the direction of trouble. Brent climbed down from the snowcat with the careful, unhurried movements of a man confident that the cold would wait for him. He looked at the porch lights still on, though daylight had come. He looked at the sled by the entry window, the smoke from the chimney, the fresh shovel lines the little sock Hannah had hung near the stove and forgotten was visible from outside. Then he smiled. "Mr. Mercer," Brent called. His voice carried well, polished by years of telling workers bad news across noisy yards. "I hope I'm not intruding." Caleb opened the door before Hannah could answer. Cold entered. Atlas stood beside his left knee, sable fur bristling, his torn ear tipped forward. Caleb did not step aside. "You are." Brent's smile held, but the eyes behind it cooled. "Fair enough. Weather brings out honesty in people." "Weather brings out people with reasons. What's yours?" Brent looked past Caleb toward Hannah, who had come to stand by the stove. "I heard Mrs. Pierce found her way up here. Wanted to make sure everyone was all right." "You drove a snowcat through a closed road out of concern. I've got equipment. County doesn't. Sometimes private citizens help where government can't." Caleb nodded once. "Good. Take the snowcat back down and help the church." The smile thinned. Hannah made a sound that might have been warning. Brent removed his gloves finger by finger, as if preparing for business indoors. "May I come in?" "No, Caleb," Hannah said quietly. It was not a plea for Brent. It was a plea for control. Caleb heard it. He opened the door wider but remained in the threshold, forcing Brent to brush past Atlas if he wanted entry. The dog did not move. Brent looked at him. "Fine animal." "He knows." "Military dog, right?" "Retired." "Like you." Caleb said nothing. Brent's boots crossed the threshold and left perfect wet prints on the floor. His eyes moved around the cabin fast and neat. The boot tray full of shoes, Eli's blanket, Maddie's fox on the stair where she had dropped it while obeying her mother. Hannah's tool roll on the table beside Caleb's oil rag. Brent saw all of it and filed it somewhere behind his still eyes. "Looks like you've settled in, Hannah." "We were caught in the storm." "Storm's got a way of making temporary things look permanent." Caleb shut the door. Atlas positioned himself between Brent and the stairs. Brent noticed. Men like Brent noticed every barrier, even the living ones. "I came for 2 reasons, Brent said. "1, to see that the Pierce children hadn't been dragged into something unsuitable. 2, to speak with you about your land, Mr. Mercer. Been meaning to for a while. Weather just moved the conversation up." "No," Brent chuckled. "I haven't made the offer yet." "Saves time." Hannah stood with both hands flat on the back of a chair. "Mr. Callahan, this isn't the time." Brent looked at her then, and there was no obvious cruelty in his face. That was what made him hard to hate cleanly. He looked orderly, practical. A man who would shovel his own walk, pay his taxes, hold a door for a woman in town, and still put a widow into snow because the ledger said she no longer belonged. The time became my concern when one of my former tenants turned up in the home of a man living alone, with a VA file thick enough to make a lawyer sweat. Caleb felt Hannah flinch, though she tried not to. Atlas gave a low growl. "Careful," Caleb said. Brent lifted both hands. "No insult intended. Everyone knows you served honorably. People respect that. They also know you keep to yourself, and grief can make a man generous in ways that don't protect him. You're worried about me. I'm worried about an arrangement that could be misunderstood." Hannah's face burned. "I didn't ask him for anything but a warm room for my children." "Hannah, I've never said you weren't a good mother. You put us out. I gave you 3 weeks after Luke passed. The lease was tied to employment. You knew that." Her hand tightened on the chair until the knuckles whitened. "Luke died on your roof. Luke failed to clip his harness." The words were calm. They landed like a shovel blade on frozen ground. Caleb's voice dropped. "Say that again." Brent looked at him, measuring. "I'm not here to argue about a tragedy. Men in that line of work take risks. I followed the law. The law must be proud." Brent's jaw flexed. He turned from Hannah, choosing Caleb because Caleb had land and therefore mattered in a language Brent understood. "You own 40 acres with private timber access and a view ridge that people from Seattle would pay stupid money to wake up under. I have investors looking at a winter lodge. Nothing tacky, high-end, quiet. I make you a fair offer, cash plus lifetime occupancy of this cabin. You live easy. No repairs, no fuel worries, no county nosing around when storms knock your power out. When your time comes, the property transfers cleanly. You get peace." Caleb looked around his cabin. Wet boots, steam, a child's sock, a widow in his fleece, a dog ready to commit a felony if asked. "You mean I get to wait around dying on land you already own?" Brent sighed. "Ugly when you put it that way. Accuracy often is." Brent's face hardened by degrees. "Think it through. You have no wife, no children. Your closest blood is Darren Mercer, and everyone in town knows Darren couldn't manage a lemonade stand without refinancing it. If you don't make arrangements, he'll get tangled in your affairs the minute something happens. You'd be better off dealing with a serious man now." Caleb felt the room tilt, not with dizziness, but with memory. Serious men. Officers with clean boots, administrators with folders, people who arrived after the blood dried and explained what the world required next. He looked at Brent. "How long after Luke's funeral did you tell Hannah to clear out?" Brent did not blink. "I gave her 3 weeks. Her son was sick. Her son is often sick. That's not a business model." Hannah went white. Caleb moved before he chose to, 1 step forward, and Atlas moved with him. Brent took 1 step back, not from fear exactly, but from calculation. Caleb stopped. He could feel the old training in his shoulders, every efficient method of making a man regret his mouth. He breathed once, twice. Hannah's voice came from behind him, low. "Caleb." That single word did what Brent's caution could not. It called him back. Caleb looked at Atlas. The dog was trembling, not with fear, but with readiness. "Sit," Caleb said. Atlas sat, furious. Caleb turned to Brent. "Get off my property." Brent put his gloves back on slowly. "You're making an emotional decision. I make those now? Retirement hobby. This woman has been here, what, 2 days? Long enough to fix my generator. Long enough to keep her child breathing. Long enough for my dog to prefer her judgment." Dogs are sentimental. Atlas showed his teeth. Brent looked down, then back up. One day you're going to fall, Mr. Mercer, maybe on that knee, maybe in one of those bad spells everybody pretends not to talk about. When that day comes, Mrs. Pierce will have to decide whether to pick you up or take what she can carry and run. I hope for your sake you know which kind of woman you've invited in. Hannah's eyes filled, but she did not lower them. Caleb opened the door. I know exactly what kind. She didn't push through a door that wasn't locked. She waited until she was invited. Brent stepped onto the porch. Snow glittered around him. Invitations can be forged. So can concern. For the first time, Brent's pleasant mask slipped fully. This isn't finished. Men keep saying that when they run out of useful sentences. Brent climbed into the snowcat, started the engine, and turned the machine with a violence that chewed up the packed snow in front of the cabin. He drove away down the hidden road, red shape shrinking between the pines, engine growling until the trees swallowed it. Silence did not return all at once. It came back in pieces. The stove ticked. Eli made a sleepy sound upstairs. Maddie whispered something to him. Atlas stood from his sit command and shook himself hard, tags ringing. Caleb remained in the doorway, one hand on the frame, watching the track Brent had left. The red snowcat's engine had faded, but another sound rose beneath it, impossible and immediate. Rotor blades. Not in the sky, in Caleb's skull. A helicopter cutting through dust, men shouting, Atlas barking behind a blast wall, the smell of burned rubber, copper, blood, hot sand. Someone saying, Mason was hit. Someone saying, medic. Someone saying, move, move, move. Caleb's hand tightened on the doorframe. The wood under his fingers became the edge of a broken vehicle. Snow became ash. The porch tilted. He heard Rebecca's phone message under the radio static. Caleb, call me when you land. Sophie's in the back singing that awful snowman song again. We love you. Call me. His breath stopped halfway in. He knew what was happening. Knowing did not stop it. PTSD was not confusion. It was memory with teeth. Caleb, Hannah's voice came from far away. He tried to answer. No air. Atlas pressed into his left leg so hard the bad knee buckled and Caleb went down onto the porch boards. Cold punched through his palms. The world narrowed to white engine blood, the missed call, the red machine disappearing where the road should be. Hannah dropped beside him. Don't touch him, Mara had once told people in town when Caleb froze at a Veterans Day ceremony. Let Atlas ground him first. Hannah did not know that, but she knew enough not to grab. She knelt in the snow in front of him, close but not crowding her face level with his. Caleb, she said, firm now, no pity. Look at Atlas. He could not. Look at the dog who's about to put his whole muddy body on you if you don't cooperate. Atlas whined, insulted and worried. Hannah kept her voice steady. You're on the porch. North Fork Road, Whitefish, snow, not sand, stove smoke, not burning fuel. My son is upstairs, stealing breath from God and giving it back. Maddie has your fox. I am right here. Caleb dragged one breath in. It hurt. Good. Hurt belonged to now. Hannah's hands hovered near his but did not take them. There you are, she said, as if he had come back from the woods and not from a war. The words broke something in him. He bent forward, one hand in Atlas's fur, the other braced on the snow-covered boards, shaking too hard to hide it. Hannah stayed on her knees in the cold with him, and the porch light burned over all three of them. From the stairs inside, Maddie's small voice whispered, Mom. Hannah looked back once then, at Caleb, and in her face he saw the question Brent had planted, already growing thorns. If he fell, what would she do? Caleb had no answer yet. He only knew that he had fallen and she had not moved away. The afternoon sky above North Fork Road closed down again, low and bruised, and the snow that had glittered in the morning began to move sideways across the porch. Caleb Mercer stayed on his knees longer than he wanted to. Pride told him to stand. Training told him to assess recover move. His body, which had carried him through war and grief and 3 years of stubborn isolation, refused both instructions for several humiliating seconds. Atlas leaned against him with the full weight of old loyalty, sable fur damp from blown snow, his broad head pressed under Caleb's hand. Hannah Pierce knelt in front of them without touching him, though her own knees had to be soaking through. She kept saying ordinary things in a steady voice. The stove needed feeding. Eli was breathing. Maddie was inside. The porch boards were cold. Atlas smelled like wet dog and self-importance. That last one made Caleb pull in a ragged breath that almost became a laugh and then became something worse. He bent forward, forehead nearly touching the dog's neck. "I'm fine," he managed. Hannah did not insult him by agreeing. "No." He shut his eyes. "That's your bedside manner. I don't have a bedside. I had a trailer with a couch spring that stabbed people. Luxury. We called it character." The words were small and plain, and they kept the world from sliding backward into rotor blades. After a while, Caleb sat back on his heels. His hands shook openly now. He hated that Hannah saw it. He hated more that some treacherous part of him was relieved she had. Secrets get heavy when a man has been his own only witness. From the stairs inside, Maddie peered around the door with Eli on her hip, the baby wrapped in a quilt, hair sticking up, damp from sleep. The cedar fox was tucked under Maddie's arm. Caleb looked away, quickly ashamed before the child could be frightened. Hannah saw that too. She rose, crossed the threshold, took Eli, murmured to Maddie, and sent her back to the stove. Then she returned to Caleb and held out one hand. "Can you stand?" "Yes." That wasn't the question. "Can you stand without lying about it?" He stared at her hand. It was chapped, strong, small compared with his. "Maybe." "Good. We'll take maybe." He took it. He did not put all his weight on her. He told himself that anyway. Still, Hannah braced like a woman lifting more than a man, and together with Atlas wedged against his thigh, Caleb got upright. The porch spun once, then steadied. Hannah did not let go until his hand unclenched. "Brent talks like that to everyone," she said. "Like he is only naming weather." He was right about one thing. "No. You don't know which thing. I know enough." Caleb looked at the red tracks already filling with snow. "I fell." "Yes. You saw what happens. I saw a man have a bad spell after another man shoved his finger straight into a wound. Call it what it is. I am a wound. PTSD. That too. Panic. That too." Her voice hardened, not at him but for him. "Not useless, not crazy, not dangerous to my children because your hands shook on your own porch." He swallowed. "You should think about what he said. I did. Fast. Mothers think fast. It's the only sport we can afford." He almost smiled. Almost. Hannah stepped closer, snow clinging to her hair. "Listen to me, Caleb Mercer. I came up your road because I had nowhere else to go. That is true. I would have slept under those pines if Atlas had not had better manners than both of us. That is true too. But I am not here now because of the roof only. I am here because you cut wet clothes off my son with hands that were shaking and still knew exactly how not to hurt him. Because you gave Maddie socks and pretended they were just socks when any fool could see they belonged to a child you loved. Because you opened a room that had winter locked inside it and then sat up all night carving a fox you knew would not be good enough. It was not good enough. That was the point. It was yours." Caleb's eyes burned. He looked past her. She did not let him escape. "If you fall one day," she said slower now, "I will pick you up. If I cannot lift you, I will sit down beside you in the snow and yell until Mara hears me in town. If Brent offers me money to leave you there, I will tell him where he can put it, and I will use words Maddie is not allowed to repeat until she owns property." Atlas wagged once. Caleb made a broken sound. Hannah's eyes filled, but did not spill. "You hear me?" He nodded. "Say it." The demand startled him. "I hear you. Again, because men like you leak sense. I hear you, Hannah." She stepped back then, as if she had used up something expensive. That evening, Caleb asked for the cemetery. He did it while Hannah was cutting potatoes into the soup pot, and Maddie was teaching Atlas to stay with a cracker balanced on his paw, which he considered emotional abuse. The request came out so flat that Hannah at first thought she had misheard. "What?" "Rebecca and Sophie are buried in Whitefish Cemetery." Maddie's hand froze over Atlas's paw. The cracker slid off. Atlas caught it mid-air and ate it, trial concluded in his favor. Caleb kept his eyes on the stove. "I haven't been in 3 years. Hannah set the knife down. "You want to go now?" "Not now. Road's buried. When Mara says it's safe." "All right. I need you to drive." "All right." "I may not be useful when we get there." "All right." He looked at her then. "That's it? Were you hoping for a committee?" "No." "Then all right." The roads opened 2 days later. If opened meant one county plow had carved a narrow passage between walls of snow and warned everyone with sense to stay home. Mara Quinn came up in a county truck with chains on the tires, short brown hair shoved under a wool cap, face red from wind, eyes taking in the cabin with quick professional care. She looked at Hannah, the children, the full boot tray, the porch light still on at noon, and then at Caleb. "Well," she said, "the mountain developed a family." Caleb gave her a look. "Don't start. I already started, internally." She checked Eli, brought children's medicine from the shelter, and pretended not to notice Maddie holding Caleb's sleeve when Atlas bumped her. When Caleb told her about the cemetery, Mara's expression changed, but only slightly. Good deputies and good friends know when softness would bruise. "Road into town is passable if you go slow," she said. "I'll follow." Caleb almost refused. Then he saw Hannah watching and swallowed the reflex. "Fine. Look at you accepting help. Should I alert the paper? I can still change my mind. There he is." The drive into Whitefish took nearly 2 hours. Snowbanks rose higher than the truck hood in places. The lake lay dark and still under a skin of ice, and the town seemed quieter than Caleb remembered, as if people had learned to speak softly around winter. Hannah drove his old pickup with both hands tight on the wheel. Caleb sat beside her, Atlas in the back, with Maddie and Eli the cedar fox wedged in the child's lap. Whitefish Cemetery rested under a clean white quilt on a gentle rise where bare cottonwoods scratched at the sky. Caleb knew the place. He had chosen the plots because Rebecca liked the view of the mountains, and Sophie had once said cemeteries were just gardens where people planted names. He had nodded when she said it, amused and unsettled, never imagining how soon he would plant hers. Hannah parked by the iron gate. Mara's truck idled behind them, respectful distance. Caleb got out too fast and nearly went down when his knee hit the cold. Hannah came around but did not take his arm until he held it out. That mattered. They walked through snow to 2 stones near a low pine, Atlas pacing on Caleb's other side. Maddie trailed behind with Eli bundled on her hip, because she had insisted she was strong enough, and Hannah, after one look from the girl, had let her carry him the last few yards. The stones were half buried. Rebecca Ann Mercer, beloved wife and mother. Sophie Grace Mercer, beloved daughter, Bright Star. Caleb had not chosen Bright Star. The pastor had suggested it because Caleb could not speak. He had hated it for 3 years and loved it for the same reason. Hannah knelt and began clearing snow from Rebecca's stone with her gloved hands. Maddie watched, then knelt at Sophie's. No one told her to. She brushed the letters slowly, serious as prayer. Atlas sat between the graves, body upright, muzzle silvered with frost, a sentry at a post he had once abandoned only because nobody had brought him. Caleb stood with his hand on Hannah's shoulder, and felt the first sob come up like a thing with claws. He fought it. Lost. "Rebecca," he said, and the name broke in the middle. Hannah's hand covered his where it rested on her shoulder. Caleb closed his eyes. "I brought company." The wind moved through the bare branches. Maddie wiped snow from the word Sophie and whispered, "She was 6 too." "When she died, yes." "Did she like foxes?"
Caleb looked at the cedar fox under Maddie's arm. "She liked anything she could make bossy."
"I would have liked her. That did it." Caleb lowered himself into the snow in front of the stones, bad knee and all, and cried, with both hands over his face, while Atlas leaned into him and Hannah stayed kneeling beside Rebecca's name. It was not clean. Nothing important is. When they returned to the truck, Caleb was hollowed out but breathing, and the mountains looked less like a wall than a witness.
They were almost to the gate when a man stepped from behind a parked SUV, holding a phone chest high as if filming wildlife. He was mid-40s, handsome in the soft, slightly spoiled way of men who had once been told they had potential and had mistaken that for achievement. His coat was too light for the cold because vanity had won over weather. Caleb stopped before the man spoke. Blood recognizes blood reluctantly. "Darren." Darren Mercer lowered the phone but did not put it away. His eyes moved from Caleb's wet face to Hannah's hand on his arm, to Maddie holding Eli, to Atlas, to the two graves. "Cousin," he said. "Heard you were in town. Thought I should check on you." Mara's truck door opened behind them. Darren glanced over and smiled the smile of a man recalculating for witnesses. "Deputy Quinn. Didn't know this was official." "It isn't," Mara said. "Yet." Darren looked at Hannah. "You must be Mrs. Pierce." Hannah did not answer. Caleb felt her fingers tighten around his sleeve. Darren's smile sharpened. "People are talking, Caleb. Stranger and her kids living up at your place. Brent Callahan says she has a habit of making herself someone else's problem." Caleb took one step forward. Atlas matched him. Darren lifted the phone slightly. "Careful. That's exactly what worries folks. You've been through a lot, no shame in that, but grief can cloud judgment, PTSD too. A woman with 2 kids and nowhere to go might see an opportunity." Maddie pressed Eli closer. Hannah went still in the way she had when Brent arrived, pride freezing over fear. Caleb looked at his cousin and remembered the funeral. Darren leaving before the final hymn. Darren calling 6 months later for a loan he never repaid. Darren sending a Christmas card with no return address and Rebecca's name misspelled. "You remember my daughter's middle name?" Caleb asked. Darren blinked. "What?" "Sophie's middle name. Caleb, come on." "You came to her grave to check on me. Say her name." Snow drifted between them. Darren's face flushed. "This is emotional manipulation." Mara made a small sound. It might have been approval. Caleb nodded slowly. "Then we're done." Darren's eyes cooled. "I don't think we are. I'm the closest family you've got." Maddie spoke then, barely above the wind. "No, you're not." Everyone looked at her. Her face went pink, but she did not take it back. Caleb felt Hannah tremble beside him. Darren laughed once without humor. "That's sweet." He raised the phone again. "I'm going to protect this family from strangers, Caleb, even if you can't see what's happening." Atlas gave a low, warning rumble. Caleb put one hand on the dog's head, not to restrain him, but to keep himself steady. The porch light was miles away. The boot tray was miles away, but he felt both as if they were inside his ribs. Darren stepped back toward his SUV. "I'll be in touch." He drove off with snow spitting from his tires, and Caleb stood at the cemetery gate, with Hannah's hand still on his arm, understanding that Brent's question had become Darren's weapon, and the next storm would come dressed in paperwork. The snow eased over Kalispell the next morning, falling in fine, dry grains that hissed against the courthouse windows and turned the streets into pale lanes between brick buildings.
Caleb Mercer hated offices more than storms. Storms had honesty. Offices had chairs that forced a man's bad knee into diplomatic positions, clocks that judged silence, and pens chained to desks as if people were regularly tempted to steal the means of their own confusion. He sat in a lawyer's office above a bakery on Main Street, while Hannah Pierce waited downstairs with Maddie and Eli, and every minute she was out of sight felt like another act of cowardice. The lawyer, a thin woman named Paula Vance, with silver hair cut short and glasses on a cord, read the notes Caleb had written in block letters on yellow legal paper. 40 acres, cabin, VA benefits payable on death, emergency medical authority, trust for Hannah Pierce, Maddie Pierce, Eli Pierce. Exclusion of Darren Mercer except for $1 if required to prove omission was intentional. Paula looked over her glasses.
You understand what this will look like to some people. Caleb looked at the snow gathering on the sill. Yes, Mrs. Pierce knows. No, why not? Because if she knows, she'll leave. Paula set the paper down. That is an assumption. It's intelligence gathered from observation. Former military men do love renaming fear. Caleb's mouth tightened. He liked her more than he wanted to. She folded her hands. Mr. Mercer, you can create a revocable trust. You can name beneficiaries. You can designate medical decision-makers. But given your diagnosis and your cousin's apparent interest, I strongly recommend a current statement from your VA doctor confirming capacity and 2 witnesses, with no benefit under the trust. Mara Quinn, 1, Pastor Ellison, good, and a letter in your own hand explaining why. Caleb looked at the pen on her desk.
My handwriting is ugly. So is court. Write anyway. He thought of Hannah downstairs, probably believing the worst because life had trained her to do so. He thought of Maddie folding socks on a chair, of Eli's breath against his wrist, of Atlas lying in snow and refusing an order. She didn't ask me for land, he said. Put that in the letter. She didn't ask me for anything except heat. Not that too. She'll be angry, possibly. You're enjoying this. Paula smiled a little. No. But I have learned that love and anger often arrive in the same car when paperwork is involved. Downstairs, Hannah sat on a wooden bench outside the bakery, with Eli asleep in her lap, and Maddie pressed against her side, the cedar fox tucked into the girl's coat. Warm bread smell came through the wall, rich and cruel. Caleb had left them money for pastries, and Hannah had not spent it. Caleb saw that before she could hide the folded bills. You didn't eat. We weren't hungry. Maddie's stomach growled with a timing so merciless that even Hannah closed her eyes. Caleb looked at the girl. Operational security compromised. Maddie stared at her boots. Sorry. Never apologize for evidence. He went into the bakery and came out with 4 meat hand pies, 2 sweet rolls, and coffee. Hannah's face tightened. Caleb, it's not charity. It's weather-related morale. You can't rename everything. Watch me. She took the hand pie only when Maddie had one. They ate in the truck because the snow had thickened, and for a few minutes nobody talked. Grease shone on Maddie's fingers. Eli woke and demanded a piece of crust with the fury of a small king restored to power. Hannah fed him bits and looked straight ahead. Are you getting papers to make us leave? Caleb nearly choked on coffee. No. Her hands stilled. Then what? He looked at the windshield where wipers pushed snow aside and the city blurred beyond it. Things I need in order. What things? Legal things. About us? He did not answer fast enough. Hannah turned toward him, hurt already rising. Caleb, don't do that. Don't put my name into something I don't understand. I can't read half the words lawyers use. I can write my name, and I can read some, but not enough to know when someone is dressing a trap in Sunday clothes. Shame moved through him. Not because she suspected him, but because she had reason to suspect every signed page placed before her. It's not a trap. Then tell me. He could have.
He should have. But he saw her leaving in his mind,
Saw her pride packing the sled, saw Maddie handing back the fox because grown-ups had made kindness complicated again. "Not yet," he said. Hannah's face shut. The truck cab cooled by 10 degrees, though the heater blew hot. Maddie looked between them and held Eli tighter. Caleb had survived ambushes with less immediate regret. The radio saved him and condemned him at once. Mara's voice came over the county band mounted under the dash, all business with fear under it.
"Caleb, you near Kalispell?"
He grabbed the mic.
"Main Street. I need Atlas." "For what?" "8-year-old boy missing off Star Meadow Road. Family car slid down an access track. Parents made it to a farmhouse with a head injury and hypothermia. Kid panicked, ran before they could stop him. Search team delayed by a slide near the bridge. We have maybe 90 minutes before dark turns this ugly."
Caleb looked at Atlas in the back seat.
The dog had lifted his head at Mara's voice, ears forward, old body suddenly younger in every line. Hannah's anger vanished into attention. "How far?" Caleb asked. 40 minutes if you drive like you used to, and don't tell me about it." "Weather?" "Whiteout bands, drifting, creek beds hidden. I wouldn't ask if—" Static swallowed the rest. Caleb knew what she had not said.
"I wouldn't ask if it wasn't a child." The cab filled with the small, wet sounds of Eli chewing crust. Maddie whispered, "A kid is lost."
Hannah looked at Caleb. The question between them changed shape. Not us, not papers. A child in snow. Caleb felt the old door inside him slam. Sophie in a ditch, Sophie in a pink coat, Sophie where he could not reach. His hand tightened on the mic until it creaked. Atlas pushed his muzzle between the seats and took Caleb's glove in his teeth. Not hard. Enough. The same pull as the night under the pines. Caleb looked at him. "You are retired." Atlas held the glove and stared. Hannah said quietly, "So are you." He turned. Her face was still hurt, still guarded, but the mother in her had stepped forward with no patience for adult wounds. "Can you find him?" Caleb swallowed. "Atlas can." "And you?" The honest answer took effort. "I can help." Hannah nodded once. "Then go. You and the kid stay with Paula. Bakery's warm." "No, Hannah."
"I can handle a rope. I can follow instructions. I fixed your generator and dragged propane through snow. If you freeze up out there, Atlas can't drive you home." The words struck hard because they were true. "It's not safe. No part of my week has been safe." Maddie lifted her chin. "I can stay with the lawyer and watch Eli." Hannah looked at her daughter. "Maddie, I can. If the boy is lost, go." 6 years old and already offering the grown-ups permission to be brave. Caleb closed his eyes once, then made the decision because waiting was only fear wearing a uniform. "Maddie and Eli stay with Paula. Hannah comes if Mara approves." He keyed the mic. "Mara, I have Hannah Pierce. Capable, no SAR certification, can use rope, follow direction." Mara's answer came fast. "If she's with you, I trust her more than half my volunteers. Bring her." Star Meadow Road was less a road than a white wound through timber by the time Caleb's truck crawled onto it behind Mara's flashing lights. The afternoon had gone dim, snow blowing hard enough to erase tire tracks within minutes. Hannah sat beside Caleb with a coil of rope across her lap, wearing borrowed snow pants from Mara's emergency bin and Caleb's spare gloves. Her anger about the lawyer had not gone away. It waited, disciplined, behind her eyes. Caleb respected that. Some fights could hold their place in line when a child's life stood at the front. Atlas paced in the back, whining once every few minutes, not from impatience, but from scent pooling under wind. At the staging point, the boy's mother sat in a volunteer's truck with a bandage on her forehead, sobbing into a blanket, while her husband argued weakly with a paramedic. "His name is Owen," Mara told them.
Blue coat, yellow gloves, dinosaur hat. Last seen running uphill from the access track.
He may have tried to follow the creek. He is 8, scared, and underdressed. Caleb nodded.
Scent article. Mara handed him a small backpack. Atlas pressed his nose to it and inhaled, then went still. The world narrowed. Caleb clipped the long line to Atlas's harness. His fingers remembered everything. Search, he said. Atlas moved into the snow like an arrow that had been waiting years for release. Caleb followed, line in one hand, trekking pole in the other. Hannah clipped herself to Caleb's belt with the secondary rope, not too tight enough to feel him. 3 taps if you need me to stop, she said. He looked back. Who taught you that? You did. You tap the stove twice when the damper sticks and 3 times when you're mad at it. That's not a system. It is now. Mara moved to their left, radio raised, eyes scanning. The trees closed around them and the road disappeared behind blowing white. Atlas quartered once, twice, then pulled sharply downhill. Caleb's knee protested. He ignored it. Hannah slipped, caught herself, and kept moving. You good? He asked. No, she said. But I'm moving. That answer, he thought, was most of life.
They found the first yellow glove snagged on a low branch above a shallow ravine where snow had drifted over a creek bed.
Atlas stopped so suddenly Caleb nearly stumbled into him. The dog did not bark. He looked down into the white, hollow nose, working body rigid. Mara came up behind them, breathing hard. What do you have? Caleb crouched. The snow surface looked smooth except for a small depression half filled by fresh powder, and just beyond it a darker gap where water moved under ice. He went down. Hannah's rope tightened behind him. Can he get out? Caleb studied the slope, the hidden creek, the broken edge under the drift. Maybe he crawled under that deadfall. Atlas whined, then pawed at the lip of the ravine. Caleb's pulse slowed in the old, terrible way. Work mode. Do the next thing. Fear later. Mara, anchor line to that pine. Hannah, you belay me from here. If I drop, don't be heroic. Sit back into the rope and yell. You give cheerful instructions.
I contain multitudes.
Mara tied off fast. Hannah checked the knot with hands steadier than Caleb expected. He saw Luke's tool roll in those hands the life that had trained them. He began to descend, boots cutting into the slope, snow sliding around his calves. Atlas stayed above until Caleb gave him slack, then came down lighter, nose low. Halfway, a gust tore through the ravine and filled the air with white. Caleb lost sight of the top. He heard Hannah's voice through it. I've got you. Not loud, enough. Atlas lunged toward the deadfall, shoved his head under a curtain of snow and barked once, sharp enough to crack the ravine open. Caleb dropped beside him and dug with both hands. Snow collapsed from the branches. A flash of blue appeared beneath the fallen tree, then a dinosaur hat green spikes rhymed with ice. Caleb reached into the dark pocket under the trunk and felt fabric, then a small arm pulling away in terror. Owen, he said, forcing calm into every syllable. My name is Caleb. This is Atlas. Your mom sent us. A child's sob came from the hollow. No. Yes, she is very bossy and insists you come back. Atlas wriggled forward on his belly, old joints protesting, and pushed his muzzle into the gap. The crying changed. Small fingers grabbed the fur at his neck. Caleb looked up toward the white blur where Hannah held the line. We've got him, he called. Then the snow shelf beneath his left boot gave way, his bad knee twisted and pain exploded white-hot up his leg as he slammed shoulder first against the deadfall trapped between the boy under the tree and the creek opening below. Atlas barked again, frantic now, and above him Hannah's rope snapped tight.
The ravine below Star Meadow Road filled with wind so fast that snow seemed to rise from the ground instead of falling from the sky, and the deadfall above the hidden creek groaned under its new white weight. Caleb Mercer lay wedged against the trunk with his left knee twisted beneath him, one shoulder jammed into ice,
and one hand still reaching into the dark hollow where Owen Rusk clutched Atlas's fur with both fists. Pain did not come as one thing. It came as weather. Heat behind the kneecap lightening up the thigh, a sick, grinding pressure that made the edges of his vision pulse. The creek whispered below the snow crust, inches from his boot. Black water under white skin. Above him, the rescue line snapped tight, and Hannah Pierce's voice cut through the storm. "Caleb?" He wanted to answer that he was fine. Fine was the oldest lie in the language and the most portable. Instead, he inhaled, tasted snow and cedar bark, and said, "Hold!" One word. Enough. Atlas had crawled halfway under the deadfall, his broad sable shoulders jammed against branches, old hips trembling with effort. The dog did not pull back. Owen was sobbing now, not loudly, but alive, and each sob sent small puffs of vapor from the hollow. "My leg," the boy cried. "I can't get out." Caleb pushed his glove deeper into the space and found the child's boot pinned under a branch. Not crushed, caught. "Owen, listen to me. Atlas is going to stay right there. You keep one hand on his collar. With the other, I need you to wiggle your toes." "I can't." "That's all right. Wiggle them badly." A hiccup. "What?" "Nobody grades toes in weather like this." The boy made a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. Good. Laughter took air. Air meant fight. Caleb shifted, and the pain in his knee flared so bright he almost lost the present. For 1 second, the ravine became the inside of a ruined vehicle. Snow became glass. The child's cry became Sophie, calling from somewhere he could not reach. The creek's whisper became Rebecca's phone message, endlessly beginning and never answered. His fingers dug into bark. No, not then. Now. North Fork country, Star Meadow Ravine. Owen alive. Atlas working. Hannah on rope. Mara above. He tapped the line 3 times with his free hand. The rope answered at once. 3 taps back from Hannah, then her voice. "I've got you. Tell me what to do." Caleb almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she sounded furious, and fury was better than panic. "Need slack 6 inches, then lock. Mara anchors. You belay. Don't let me slide." "That was my plan before you turned bossy." "I was born this way." The line loosened just enough. Caleb shifted his weight off the trapped knee and slid his shoulder deeper under the branch. His breath went white against the darkness. Atlas turned one eye toward him, steady and bright. "You're too big," Caleb told the dog. Atlas ignored the slander. Caleb took his knife from his belt and began cutting away smaller branches around the boy's boot. The wood was frozen, stubborn, and close to Owen's leg. His glove made the knife clumsy. He stripped it off with his teeth. Cold bit his fingers instantly. "Owen," he said, "what's on your hat?" "Dinosaurs." "Which kind?" "Stegosaurus."
You sure looks like a tiny alligator with opinions.
"It's Stegosaurus."
More breath.
Better. Caleb sawed at the branch. Above Mara's radio crackled. "Primary team 10 minutes out, if the road holds." Hannah answered. "He doesn't have 10 minutes. Caleb heard the rope creak as she set her weight back harder. He could picture her at the lip of the ravine, boots dug in, jaw set, Luke's widow holding a man twice her size because nobody had asked whether she could. They had only needed her to. The branch snapped. Owen's boot came free so suddenly the boy kicked Caleb in the wrist. "Good," Caleb said through clenched teeth. "Violence means circulation." Atlas backed out inch by inch, coaxing the boy with him, letting Owen grip his harness. Snow fell from the deadfall onto Caleb's neck. The trunk shifted. "Move, Owen." "I'm scared." "Me too. Move anyway." The boy crawled. Caleb guided his shoulders through the gap. Atlas pulled backward with slow, careful strength.
When Owen emerged, he collapsed against the dog blue coat packed with snow. One yellow glove missing.
dinosaur hat crooked over one eye. Caleb clipped the spare loop of line around the child's waist. "Hannah, take him." "Send him up." Owen looked back. "You come too." Caleb saw the creek edge crumble under his boot. "After you. Promise?" Caleb's throat tightened. "Yes." They hauled Owen first. Hannah and Mara pulled, while Atlas scrambled beside the boy, barking encouragement or insults, no one could tell. Owen slid up the slope in jerks, crying, coughing, alive. Caleb watched until the blue coat disappeared over the lip. Relief hit him so hard he nearly let go of the branch supporting him. Mistake. The snow shelf under his good boot collapsed another inch, and cold water slapped his heel. He drove his elbow into the trunk and breathed through his teeth. "Caleb!" Hannah shouted. "I'm here." "Line to you." "Already clipped." "Then climb." Simple instruction. Offensive, really. Caleb tried to move his left leg, and white pain took the world apart. He did not scream. He made a sound he would later deny, and Atlas would absolutely remember. The dog reappeared at the lip and tried to descend again. "No!" Caleb barked. Atlas stopped shaking with the insult of being forbidden from bad decisions he personally approved. Hannah's head appeared through blowing snow above, face white with cold, eyes dark and furious. "Can you climb?" "Define climb." "Caleb!" "Knees bad." "How bad?" "Impending paperwork." She vanished for a second, then the line tightened around his harness. "We're going to pull." "You'll tear something." "You already tore something. Be quiet." Mara's voice came after hers. "Mercer primary team is 2 minutes. We can lower a basket." Caleb looked at the creek. Water widened the gap beneath the snow. 2 minutes could be a lifetime in winter. "Pull," he said. The rope took his weight. Fire went through his leg and burst behind his eyes. He dug his right boot into the slope, pushed with his good leg, dragged the bad one like an enemy, and moved 3 inches. Then 4. Atlas stood above, barking now, each bark a command. Caleb climbed because the alternative was too stupid. Halfway up, the world flashed again. Not ravine, ditch, not Owen, Sophie, pink coat, small hand. He froze. The rope jerked tight. "Caleb!" Hannah's voice came down. He could not answer. He could hear Sophie. "Daddy, I dropped my mitten." Not memory now. Hallucination, maybe. He knew that and still could not move. Then 3 taps came through the rope, firm, human, now. Hannah's system. Tap, tap, tap. "Eli is waiting for the man who promised to fix his wooden horse," she shouted. There was no wooden horse, not yet. Maybe she invented it. Maybe it did not matter. The sentence was ridiculous and exact. It gave him a future task small enough to hold. Caleb dragged in air and moved. When he reached the top, Hannah and Mara pulled him over the lip like hauling a felled tree, which he would have objected to if dignity had not been lying face down somewhere in the ravine. He ended on his back in snow, staring at the white sky. Atlas shoved his muzzle into Caleb's face, whining, licking snow and sweat and whatever remained of pride. "Get off!" Caleb rasped. The dog did not. Hannah crawled to his side. Her hat was gone, hair whipped across her face, cheeks raw, eyes bright with fear she had not spent until now. "You promised," she said. "To Owen." "I heard. You keep promises badly if someone doesn't supervise." "You're applying for the position. Apparently, I already work here." Mara knelt near his leg, assessing with gloved hands. "Knees swelling fast. We need you out." "Owen?" Caleb asked, in the truck, cold, scared alive. His mother is going to smother him with love and possibly a blanket. Good outcome. Caleb closed his eyes. Good outcome. He tried to sit up and nearly blacked out. Hannah put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't." He opened his eyes. "You going to carry me?" "If I have to." "I'm heavy." "So was my grief."
I carried that before breakfast. Mara looked between them and wisely said nothing. The primary team arrived with a rescue sled, and Caleb was strapped onto it despite several thoughtful objections no one honored. Atlas walked beside the sled all the way back, shoulder brushing Caleb's arm. Hannah held the rear line, boots sliding body angled against the downhill pull. It was absurd. The woman he had nearly left under pines now hauling him through snow, while the child he had feared to save cried safely in a heated truck. The world has a way of arranging mirrors when a man least wants to see himself. At the road, Owen's mother broke away from the paramedic and dropped beside Caleb long enough to press her hand to his cheek. "Thank you," she said. Her tears fell hot on his skin.
Caleb looked past her at Owen, wrapped in blankets, with Atlas's fur still clenched in one fist.
"Thank the dog," he said.
"I mostly complicated terrain." Owen's father laughed and cried at the same time. Atlas accepted gratitude with the solemnity of royalty. By the time they reached the clinic in Whitefish, Caleb's knee had swollen under the brace. Hannah's hands were shaking from exhaustion, and Atlas had been fed half a turkey sandwich by 3 different people who all claimed innocence. News had moved faster than the plows. A former SEAL and his canine had found a lost boy. A widow from Callahan Lumber had held the rescue line. Deputy Quinn had coordinated the search. The story should have warmed the town cleanly. Stories rarely stay clean once people with motives pick them up. Caleb sat on an exam table while a doctor prodded his knee and used phrases like severe sprain, possible ligament damage, imaging in Kalispell, and you are not 25 anymore. Caleb disliked all of them, especially the accurate one. Hannah stood near the door with Eli asleep against her and Maddie leaning on her side, the cedar fox in the pocket of her coat. Mara entered without knocking, which was her love language. Her face had gone hard. Behind her came Darren Mercer, in a wool coat dusted with snow, carrying a folder. Brent Callahan stood outside the room in the hall, not entering, not leaving, simply visible. Caleb felt Atlas tense under the exam table. "This is a clinic," Mara said to Darren. "Not your office." Darren's smile was thin and rehearsed. "I'm here as family." "You keep saying that like repetition creates evidence." Caleb swung his legs over the side of the exam table. Payne objected. Hannah stepped forward, then stopped herself. Darren saw that and smiled wider. "Caleb, I heard about the rescue. Brave. Reckless, given your condition. This is exactly what I was afraid of." He placed the folder on the counter. "I filed a petition requesting a capacity evaluation and temporary restraint on any transfer of property or assets to non-family parties pending review." Hannah's face emptied. "What?" Darren looked at her with manufactured regret. "Mrs. Pierce, if your intentions are innocent—" "This protects everyone." Caleb reached for his cane. "Get out." "You see," Darren said softly, not to Caleb, but to the room. "Agitation, impulsivity. A child could have lost his rescuer today because my cousin can't separate old trauma from present decisions." Mara's voice cut cold. "Your cousin saved that child. With help from a woman who benefits if he sees himself as needed." Hannah flinched as if struck. Caleb stood, bad knee screaming, one hand on Atlas's harness. He did not lunge. He did not shout. That would give Darren what he wanted. He looked at his cousin and said very quietly, "You filed papers while a boy was still warming up in an ambulance." Darren's eyes flickered. "Someone has to think clearly," Caleb nodded. "Then let's have the court hear all of it." Outside the clinic window, snow began again, soft and patient, covering tracks no one had finished making. Flathead County Courthouse stood under a pale winter morning 3 days later. Its brick face dusted with snow, and its steps salted into gray slush. Caleb Mercer climbed those steps slowly, his left knee locked in a brace under dark trousers. One hand on a cane he hated, and the other resting lightly on Atlas's harness. The old German shepherd wore his retired canine vest, sable coat brushed, torn ear, alert gray muzzle. Dignified enough to make half the people on the sidewalk step aside as if a decorated officer were passing. Hannah Pierce walked on Caleb's right, with Eli bundled against her chest and Maddie holding her free hand. Maddie wore borrowed boots that fit Sophie's red socks underneath, and her cedar fox tucked into the crook of her arm like a witness she intended to call if grown-ups began lying. Mara Quinn met them at the top step, in uniform hat tucked under one arm, expression set for battle. "You ready?" she asked. Caleb looked at the courthouse doors. "No." Mara nodded. "Good. Liars say yes." Hannah's hand found the back of his coat for 1 second, not pushing just there. He could feel her anger still, not at him alone anymore, but at every system that required a poor woman to prove she had not stolen warmth by standing near it. Caleb had tried to explain the trust the night before. It had gone badly then, honestly, then quietly. Hannah had cried without sound when he said he wanted the children protected if something happened to him. Then she had called him a mule for not telling her sooner. He had accepted the charge. Atlas had stolen a sock during the argument, possibly to relieve tension, possibly because he was a criminal. Now inside the courthouse, Darren Mercer waited with a lawyer who looked polished enough to slide off furniture, and Brent Callahan sat 2 rows back, wearing a charcoal coat and the calm of a man who preferred other people to do his dirty work in public. Caleb saw them both and felt no surprise. The hearing room smelled of wet wool old paper and burnt coffee. A judge named Elaine Porter took the bench, silver-haired, compact, and uninterested in theater. Caleb liked her immediately, and feared her for the same reason. Darren's lawyer began gently, which was how knives entered without tearing the fabric. He spoke of concern, combat trauma, isolation, a recent emotionally intense relationship with a vulnerable widow, a sudden plan to transfer assets away from blood relatives, a dangerous rescue that might have killed Caleb because he could not resist reliving the past. He did not call Hannah a predator. He shaped the air until the word hovered without landing. Hannah sat very still. Maddie pressed against her. Atlas lay under Caleb's chair with his head on his paws and his eyes open, tracking every moving foot. When Darren testified, he performed sorrow with competence. He spoke of Caleb as a brother in all but name, though he had not been inside the cabin in 3 years. He spoke of Rebecca and Sophie without using Sophie's middle name, and Caleb watched Judge Porter's pen pause at that omission because Caleb's lawyer, Paula Vance, had already filed the family record. Darren said he feared Caleb's PTSD had made him vulnerable to manipulation. "Mrs. Pierce arrived with nothing," Darren said. "Within days, my cousin is making legal arrangements around her and her children. That is not normal." Paula stood. "Mr. Mercer, how many times did you visit Caleb after his wife and daughter died?" Darren blinked. "I gave him space. How many?" "I don't recall. Phone calls?" "A few." "Do you remember the last time you brought him groceries during a storm?" "That's not fair. It is a question." Darren flushed. "I didn't." "The last time you helped repair his generator?" "No." "The last time you asked whether he had eaten?" Silence. Paula let it sit. Then she asked, "Do you know the name of Mrs. Mercer's church?" Darren looked at Caleb, angry now. "This is irrelevant." Judge Porter looked up. "Answer if you can." He could not. Paula nodded and sat. Caleb did not feel triumph, only weariness. Blood could become a word people pulled from a drawer when all other tools failed. Mara testified next. She did not decorate the truth. Caleb had PTSD. Caleb also knew how to run a search grid, manage hypothermia risk, read terrain, and follow command structure in dangerous conditions. Hannah had held the belay line correctly. Atlas had tracked the missing child under severe weather conditions. Owen Rusk was alive because the team acted fast. "Was Mr. Mercer reckless?" Paula asked.
Mara's eyes went briefly to Caleb. He took a calculated risk under emergency conditions. He also communicated limitations, accepted rope support, and followed extraction procedure once injured. Darren's lawyer asked whether Caleb froze during the rescue. Mara's jaw tightened. No. He experienced a trauma response after the child was already secured. Mrs. Pierce grounded him through the rope system they had established. That's not incompetence. That's a team adapting to a known injury. The VA doctor, Dr. Samuel Greer,
appeared by video and spoke in the dry tone of a man allergic to melodrama. Caleb had chronic PTSD, survivor's guilt, sleep disturbance, and a history of avoidance. He also had full orientation, consistent reasoning, no psychosis, and clear capacity to make legal decisions. Trauma affects what a person fears, Dr. Greer said. It does not automatically invalidate what he values. Judge Porter wrote that down. Caleb saw Hannah's shoulders lower, a little. Then Brent was called, and the room changed again. He spoke of Hannah's history at Callahan Lumber. He used words like dependency, instability, unfortunate circumstances. Caleb listened until his hands went numb around the cane. Paula asked, "Mr. Callahan, did Mrs. Pierce's husband die on your property?" Brent's expression remained controlled. "Yes." "Did you provide housing tied to his employment?" "Yes." "Did you terminate that housing after his death?" "After a reasonable period. In December?" The lease terms were clear.
"Was the roof section where Mr. Pierce fell previously reported as unsafe?" Brent's face changed by a fraction. Caleb saw it. So did Hannah. So did Mara. "I don't have those records with me." Paula smiled without warmth. "We do not need them for today's capacity matter. Thank you." It was a small door opening. Brent knew it. His mouth tightened. Hannah's hand curled around the cedar fox in Maddie's lap, and for the first time Caleb saw not shame in her face, but the beginning of a decision.
When Caleb was called, the room seemed to grow both larger and too small. He stood carefully, refusing the offer to remain seated because some truths need a body behind them, even a damaged one. Atlas rose with him and stood at heel, shoulder against Caleb's leg. Paula asked him to state his name, age, and understanding of the proceedings. He did. His voice was steady enough. Then she asked why he had created the trust. Caleb looked at the judge, not at Darren, not at Brent, not even at Hannah, because he feared that if he looked at her, he would speak only to her and forget the room needed hearing. "My wife was Rebecca Ann Mercer," he said. "My daughter was Sophie Grace Mercer. My teammate Mason Hale died outside Kandahar. Owen Rusk nearly died 3 days ago under a deadfall because Snow doesn't care whose family is official. Names matter because people disappear faster when nobody says them." The room went quiet. Caleb's fingers tightened once in Atlas's harness, And the dog leaned in. For 3 years, I kept my porch light off. I told myself it was privacy. It was punishment. A woman came up my road in a blizzard with her children and a sled. She did not force my door. She did not ask for money, papers, promises, or land. She asked for heat for a sick child. I said no. Hannah's breath caught. Caleb kept going. My dog had better sense. Atlas lay down in the snow beside Eli Pierce and waited for me to remember the one rule I used to believe in. You don't leave people behind if you can reach them. Judge Porter watched him without blinking. Mrs. Pierce fixed my generator. She helped clear wood. She held a rescue line while I pulled a child out of snow. She sat with me through a trauma response instead of using it against me. Her daughter cried in my shirt because I carved a bad fox. And her son sleeps better when my dog is by the door. That is not manipulation. That is what happened after I opened the door. Darren shifted in his seat. Caleb looked at him then. Family is not the person who waits for property to ripen. Family is who takes off a child's wet boots and puts them by the stove. Family is who knows when to hold the rope. Family is who stays when shame makes a man hard to look at. He turned back to the judge. I am of sound mind. My mind is wounded. There's a difference. I know what I own. I know who my blood is. I know who lifted me when I fell. I want my papers to reflect the truth before I die and other people rename it.
The silence after that felt like snowfall, deep and absorbing. Judge Porter recessed for 20 minutes. In the hallway, Hannah walked to the far window with Eli, and Caleb followed slowly. Maddie stayed with Mara and Atlas, feeding the dog courthouse ice chips from her palm while pretending it was training. Hannah did not turn when Caleb stopped beside her. Outside, people crossed the square with collars up against the cold. "You should have told me," she said. "I know. I am not a thing you arrange. I know. I won't be bought into staying. I know." She looked at him then, eyes wet and fierce. "Do you?" He nodded. "I'm learning slow, painfully slow. Probably a medical condition." She almost smiled. Then her face crumpled, not fully, just enough. "Nobody ever protected us without wanting to own the gratitude after." Caleb looked at Eli, asleep against her coat. "I don't want to own you. What do you want me?"
The question stood between them, brighter than the courthouse lights. He could have made a joke. He almost did. Instead, with more courage than he had used in the ravine, he said, "I want the boot tray full. I want Atlas to stop stealing socks and never stop. I want Maddie to grow up knowing a door can open and stay open. I want Eli to breathe through every winter. I want you to be able to leave because you're free and stay because you choose to." Hannah closed her eyes. A tear slipped out. "That's a dangerous amount of wanting for a man who says very little. I'm rationing." She laughed through the tear, and the sound healed nothing completely but warmed the hallway all the same. Judge Porter returned and denied Darren's petition. She found Caleb competent, the trust lawful, pending ordinary review, and warned Darren's counsel against further filings unsupported by evidence. Darren left without looking at Caleb. Brent waited on the courthouse steps, breath white in the cold, and handed Hannah a folder as she came out. "Past due trailer fees," he said quietly. "Storage cleanup damages. I can make this expensive." Hannah stared at the folder. Caleb stepped forward, but she lifted one hand to stop him. Brent leaned closer. "You may have fooled a judge about him. You haven't settled what your husband owed." Hannah's fingers tightened on the folder, and for one moment Caleb saw the old shame try to return, obedient and quick. Then Mara came down the steps behind them, eyes on Brent, and Paula Vance appeared at Caleb's shoulder. Hannah looked at Brent. Callahan really looked, and the shame did not find its old place. "No," she said. It was one word, quiet, but it landed harder than any shout. Brent's face shifted. Hannah opened the folder, saw the numbers, and then looked up with a steadiness Caleb had never seen in her before. "This time," she said, "we're going to read the paperwork." Snow fell lightly over Whitefish for 3 straight days after the hearing. Not enough to close roads, just enough to keep the world honest. Every morning the town woke to a new thin covering over tire tracks, boot prints, salt stains, and the gray slush of yesterday's errands. At Caleb Mercer's cabin on North Fork Road, the porch light stayed on through all of it. He told Hannah it was because the latch still needed replacing, and the light helped him see the screws. Hannah told him daylight also helped with screws. He said daylight lacked commitment. Maddie, who had become bolder in the exact increments of a child testing the thickness of ice, said the light was for people who might come. Caleb said people could call first. Maddie pointed out that she and her mother had not called. Atlas stole Caleb's left sock during the discussion and buried it beneath the bench, which the family court of public opinion accepted as a ruling in Maddie's favor. The word family still startled Caleb when it rose in his mind. It had not been voted on. No ceremony had announced it. It had simply gathered like boots by the stove. Hannah and Eli in the kitchen. Maddie at the table with the cedar fox beside her school worksheets Mara had brought from town. Atlas underfoot. Caleb making lists no one feared anymore. Yet the folder Brent Callahan had handed Hannah sat on the mantel for 2 days like a snake pretending to be paper. Past due occupancy fees, cleanup charges, damage assessment, storage disposal, legal notice pending. Numbers large enough to make Hannah's face go colorless. Caleb wanted to burn it. He wanted to drive to Callahan Lumber, put Brent against a wall with one hand, and explain justice in a language older than court. He did none of that because Hannah saw the thought on his face and said, no. One syllable. Efficient. I didn't say anything. Your shoulders did. My shoulders are private citizens. Your shoulders are planning a felony. Mara Quinn, who had come by with copies of public records and a bag of groceries she insisted were abandoned evidence from the shelter, snorted into her coffee. She's not wrong. Caleb looked at the deputy. You're here to help, not fraternize with opposition. I can multitask. Hannah opened the folder on the table. This time she did not lower her head before the words. Paula Vance had made large print copies and highlighted what mattered. Mara had requested OSHA complaint records and county incident reports. Caleb had pulled old weather data and roof repair invoices from a public bid archive, because men who live alone in cabins often know how to find things no one expected them to read. The picture that emerged was uglier than Brent's careful voice. The roof section where Luke Pierce fell had been reported soft by 2 workers 6 weeks before the accident. A repair crew had been scheduled, then delayed. The harness line Luke used had been noted for replacement after fraying, then marked serviceable by a supervisor whose signature looked suspiciously like Brent's assistant's. The company's safety meeting logs for that week had been backfilled after the accident, all neat and dated in the same pen. Hannah read slowly, lips moving on difficult words. Maddie sat beside her and helped sound out the ones she knew because first graders are ruthless and generous teachers. Eli chewed a wooden block Caleb had made to keep him from chewing table corners. Atlas lay with his chin on Hannah's boot, as if anchoring her to the floor. He said Luke clipped wrong, Hannah said. Her voice was calm in the way lake ice is calm before cracking. He let me think it might have been Luke's fault. Nobody answered too fast. Some silences are respect. Caleb sat across from her, hands folded, every muscle in him wanting violence and choosing presence instead. What do you want to do? He asked. Hannah looked up. I don't know. We can sue, Paula said. There may be a wrongful death claim, worker safety violations, retaliation around the housing charges. It will take time. Mara added. The county can refer safety records. State investigators won't love those logs. Caleb said nothing. Hannah noticed. What do you want? He breathed once. I want him afraid. That part I guessed. I want him to feel 1/10 of what you felt tying a sled in the dark. And after that? Caleb looked at the mantel, at the porch light glow reflected faintly in the window, though it was afternoon. After that, I don't know. Anger is bad at calendars. Hannah nodded slowly. Luke used to say revenge is a meal that keeps you hungry. Luke sounds irritatingly quotable. He was, especially before breakfast. They met Brent Callahan in Paula Vance's office instead of court because Hannah chose a table before a battlefield. Brent arrived with his own attorney. The same orderly face, the same coat, the same air of a man inconvenienced by other people's pain. He did not look at Caleb first. He looked at Hannah, and whatever he saw there made his confidence shift. She wore a dark blue dress borrowed from Mara and Caleb's heavy boots because the sidewalks were icy and she refused to wobble for a man like Brent. Her hair was braided. On the table in front of her lay the folder he had given her, the safety records Mara had found, and Luke's carpenter pencil. Maddie had insisted the pencil go. Hannah had agreed. Caleb sat beside her with Atlas under the table, one hand on the dog's collar. Mara stood near the window. Paula began with facts.
She did not raise her voice. She placed each document down like a board in a bridge Brent would have to cross. The prior roof complaint, the delayed repair,
The harness note, the suspicious meeting logs, the eviction timeline, the inflated trailer charges. Brent's attorney's face grew still. Brent's did not, but a vein appeared near his temple.
This is an unfortunate attempt to rewrite a workplace accident, he said. Hannah looked at him. Luke was 32. Brent blinked. I know. He had a daughter who still listens for his truck sometimes. He had a son who doesn't remember his voice unless I say the same bedtime line over and over. He had a wife who spent 3 months wondering if he died because he forgot one clip. You let me wonder that. Brent's hands folded on the table. I followed the advice I had. No, Hannah said. You followed the cheapest path and called it advice. Caleb felt the words land through the room. Brent looked away first. It was small. It was everything. The settlement took hours. Brent agreed to drop all charges, pay compensation to Hannah and the children,
Fund an independent safety review at Callahan Lumber. Replace the worker housing policy so families were not put out in winter within 90 days of a death or serious injury, and turn the old trailer row into emergency winter shelter managed through the church and county. Caleb wanted more. Hannah knew. She touched his wrist under the table and held him there. Public apology, she said. Brent's face hardened. No. Hannah did not move. Then court. In the end, he agreed. The apology happened in the lumber yard 2 weeks later, under a sky so blue it looked breakable. Workers gathered in coats and hard hats. Some came curious, some came angry. Some had known Luke and stared at the ground because grief among working men often hides in boot scuffs and jaw muscles. Brent stood on the loading dock holding a paper he did not read from much. He said Luke Pierce's name. He said the roof had been reported unsafe. He said the company failed to act quickly enough. He said Hannah and her children had not been treated with the dignity owed to a worker's family. His voice caught once. Whether from shame or public pressure, no one could tell, maybe both. People are rarely cleanly one thing. Hannah stood beside Caleb with Eli on her hip and Maddie holding the cedar fox. She did not forgive Brent out loud. Forgiveness, she later told Caleb, was not a show horse to trot out because a man finally said what he should have said before. But when Brent came down from the dock and stopped in front of her, hat in his hands, she did not turn away. I thought I was being practical, he said. I know, her voice was quiet. That's what scared me. You can do terrible things with clean hands if you call them practical. Brent swallowed. What kind of man does that make me? Caleb's answer would have been shorter and less useful. Hannah looked toward the workers, toward the repaired roof, toward the row of trailers where new locks would be installed and emergency supplies stored. That depends what you do after today. Brent nodded once, old and suddenly tired. As they left, Mara fell into step beside Caleb. You behaved, under protest. Noted. He deserved worse. Probably. Mara looked at Hannah ahead of them. Maddie skipping over frozen ruts, Eli laughing at Atlas because the dog had found a glove and declared it treasure. She chose something that keeps other people warm. Caleb watched Hannah pause to adjust Eli's hat. Her hands sure her shoulders no longer curved around apology. She's better at winning than I am. Most people are. Deputy? What? You have many fine qualities. Subtlety with anger is not in the top 5. Spring did not come quickly to the mountain. It arrived in practical fragments. Drips from the eaves, softer snow at noon, mud by the shed, a raven on the woodpile making rude comments at Atlas, who took them personally. Caleb's knee healed badly enough to require therapy and well enough to keep him complaining. Hannah turned the cabin into a place that functioned.
She labeled shelves in large block letters so she could practice reading them, then made Caleb label the ones he kept changing because miscellaneous tactical nonsense was not, in her view, an organizing principle. Maddie started school in Whitefish shy the first week, sharp the second, and by the third had corrected her teacher on the difference between a service dog and a retired military working dog. Eli learned 3 new words: dog, hot, and no. He used no with artistic range. Caleb repaired the porch latch properly,
Then built a longer boot tray because the old one had become inadequate to the life it was being asked to hold. He sanded the cedar smooth, set it beside the stove, and burned 4 names into the underside, where no visitor would see them unless the tray was lifted. Caleb, Hannah, Maddie, Eli. He hesitated, then burned Atlas along the edge because the dog supervised the project with the intensity of a building inspector and deserved legal recognition. Hannah found the names 2 days later while sweeping. She stood over the tray a long time, broom in hand. Caleb pretended to adjust the stove vent. "You spelled my name right," she said. "Low bar. Still." She ran one finger under the hidden letters. "Why underneath?" He shrugged. "So the house knows." Hannah looked at him, then with a softness that made him want to flee and stay in equal measure. "The house knew before you did." That evening, with the last real storm of the season moving over the ridge, Caleb brought in extra wood and did not turn off the porch light. No one commented. That was mercy. Wind rose after supper, rattling the windows, and Atlas took his post by the door, gray muzzle on his paws. Maddie read 3 pages aloud from a school book, slow and proud. Hannah corrected 1 word, and Caleb mispronounced another on purpose so Maddie could correct him too. Eli fell asleep with 1 hand in Atlas's fur. Outside, beyond the porch light's gold circles, something flashed at the bottom of the slope. Caleb looked up. Headlights. Not moving. Then a horn, faint under the wind. Hannah set her book down. Mara's radio was silent. Caleb stood, cane in hand, and Atlas rose with him. The porch light shone on 2 tire tracks sliding off the lower bend and a figure waving beside a half-buried car. For 1 suspended second, Caleb saw the old choice come back wearing a new coat. Door closed, door open. Warmth kept, warmth shared. Hannah reached for her boots. Maddie grabbed a blanket. Caleb looked at Atlas. The dog was already at the door, impatient, certain, and right. 2 winters later, snow came down over North Fork Road in broad silver flakes, gentler than the storm that had brought Hannah Pierce to Caleb Mercer's dark cabin, but deep enough to soften every fence rail and hush the pines. The cabin was no longer dark. People in Whitefish had begun calling it Porchlight Cabin. Not because Caleb approved of naming things in a way that sounded like a brochure, but because names happen when enough people need a way to point toward mercy. The porch light burned every night from October until the last spring thaw, a steady gold mark above the door. Sometimes it guided a lost driver who had taken the wrong bend after dusk. Sometimes it welcomed a veteran Mara Quinn brought up because the man had not answered his phone for 3 days and insisted he was fine with the kind of fine that made Caleb put soup on without asking. Sometimes it shone on a mother with a flat tire, a teenager whose truck battery died, a lineman caught in whiteout, a traveling nurse too tired to keep driving, a church family whose minivan slid into the ditch. Nobody stayed forever. That mattered to Caleb. A refuge was not a trap with better curtains. People came and put boots by the stove, accepted coffee strong enough to qualify as a personal challenge, and left when the road opened, or the fear passed, or help arrived. But some traces stayed. A thank you card tucked behind the spice tin, a repaired hinge, a sack of apples, a child's drawing of Atlas as a horse with wolf ears, which Caleb declared anatomically slanderous and hung on the refrigerator anyway. The boot tray he had built grew scuffed and crowded.
In the underside, hidden from most eyes, the burned names had darkened with age: Caleb, Hannah, Maddie, Eli, Atlas. Hannah found Caleb touching those letters sometimes when he thought no one saw. She never teased him for it. Well, almost never. "Checking inventory?" she asked one morning. He looked up from the tray. "Structural inspection."
Of names. Names bear load. She smiled and went back to kneading bread, and Caleb kept his hand on the cedar a moment longer because he had learned that some truths sound foolish until they are all a person has. He and Hannah married in February at the small white church in Whitefish, the one that had once been too full to shelter her, but had since learned, under Mara's relentless organizing and Hannah's quiet insistence, to keep winter cots stacked in the basement and a generator that actually worked. The wedding was not grand. Hannah said grand things made her suspicious. Caleb said he had no objection to grand if someone else assembled the chairs. Maddie 8 now walked ahead of her mother, holding the cedar fox in one hand and a small bunch of pine and white roses in the other. She had grown taller, still watchful, but the watching had changed. It was no longer the stare of a child measuring exits. It was the alertness of someone who had learned the world could be dangerous and still worth entering. Eli, 3.5, was given the rings and immediately dropped them into the church's boot tray because he believed all important objects belonged near boots and because chaos had chosen him early. Atlas sat in the center aisle wearing a blue ribbon Hannah had tied loosely around his collar. He endured it with the solemn misery of a decorated officer forced into pageantry. When Pastor Ellison asked who gave Hannah away, she answered, "No one. I came on my own." Then Maddie added, "But we're walking with her," and the pastor, to his credit, nodded as if that had been in the service book all along. Caleb's vows were short. He promised warmth, truth, room to leave, room to stay, and coffee she could weaken when he was not looking. Hannah promised to tell him when his silence had become a wall to keep spare socks where Atlas could not find them, though everyone knew that was impossible, and to choose him freely every morning she woke under his roof. At the reception in the church basement, Brent Callahan came in near the end, stood awkwardly by the coffee urn, and handed Hannah an envelope. Inside was a receipt for another year's funding to the worker emergency shelter, and a short note in handwriting that looked unused to. Apology. Hannah read it, folded it, and said, "Thank you." She did not hug him. He did not ask. That, too, was progress. The legal adoption took longer than the wedding and involved more forms which Caleb considered proof that the government distrusted Joy. Maddie insisted on reading every page she was allowed to read, sounding out the hard words at the kitchen table, while Hannah followed with a finger. Hannah had learned to read steadily by then, not fast, not without stumbling, but well enough to read the trust documents herself, and then cry angry tears because she understood fully what Caleb had tried to do badly. Eli did not understand adoption in legal terms. He understood that Caleb fixed toys, burned pancakes, made monster voices during bath time, and woke from bad dreams less often if a small hand patted his cheek and said, "Here, Dad." The first time Eli called him Dad, it happened on a Tuesday morning with no witnesses except Hannah, Maddie, and Atlas, which was to say, all the witnesses that mattered. Caleb was scraping the black edge off a pancake and claiming it was rustic when Eli, seated on 2 stacked cushions, held up his fork and said, "Dad, more syrup." The fork was sticky. The pancake was terrible. Caleb turned toward the window and stayed that way long enough for Hannah to come stand beside him. "You all right?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Maple fumes." Maddie rolled her eyes with the advanced skill of an 8-year-old who had seen through many adults. Atlas, who had been waiting for pancake failure under the table, placed his head on Caleb's boot. Caleb put one hand on the dog's head and one on Eli's chair. "More syrup," he said, voice rough. "But don't tell your mother." Hannah, holding the syrup, said, "Your mother is right here."
Operational leak. Eli laughed. Maddie laughed. Hannah laughed. Caleb did not, but the thing in his chest that had once been sealed like a winter room opened another inch. Not every ending in Porch-like Cabin was tidy. Darren Mercer left Montana after the hearing and spent a year sending nothing but rumors back through people who enjoyed carrying them. Then one autumn a letter came. It was addressed to Caleb in handwriting that leaned downhill. Darren wrote that he had been ashamed when Caleb asked Sophie's middle name because he had not known it, and had spent the night after the hearing looking through old family photos he had never cared enough to label. He did not ask for money. He did not ask to visit. He wrote, Rebecca Ann, Sophie Grace, I should have known. I'm sorry. Caleb read the letter 3 times, then placed it in the drawer with the trust documents. Hannah asked whether he would answer. Not yet, he said. But you might. Caleb looked at Atlas asleep near the door, paws twitching in some old dream. Maybe. Brent Callahan did not become a saint, which relieved Caleb, because sudden sainthood in Practical Men usually meant a consultant had been hired. Brent remained stiff, proud, occasionally insufferable, and far more careful. The worker shelter opened in the old trailer row before the next heavy snow. Hannah visited once a month to check supplies and make sure the heater worked, because she trusted policies less than thermostats. Brent showed up one evening while she was there and found her tightening a loose pipe under the sink. We have maintenance for that, he said. You had maintenance for the roof, too, she answered. He took the blow without defending himself. Then he handed her a new wrench from his coat pocket. This one's better. She took it. Forgiveness did not arrive like thunder. It arrived more like thaw, drop by drop, sometimes refreezing overnight. Caleb learned to respect that pace. Maddie grew into a girl who opened doors carefully. At school, when a new student arrived midwinter, quiet and embarrassed in borrowed boots, Maddie did not stare. She moved her backpack from the empty hook beside hers and said, You can put your coat here. Later, when she became the kind of teenager who pretended not to need praise, Caleb heard from her teacher that she did this every time. He said nothing to Maddie. He only built a larger row of hooks in the mudroom that weekend. She noticed. Of course she did. Subtle, she said. Structural, he replied. Atlas aged the way loyal creatures do, gradually, and then all at once. His muzzle went from gray to white. The scar above his eye disappeared into pale fur. His hips stiffened, and some mornings he needed Caleb's hand under his chest to rise. He still took his post by the door every night it snowed. He still stole socks, though later in life he forgot where he had hidden them and seemed personally offended when they did not reveal themselves under questioning. Eli grew up believing this was a normal feature of dogs. Maddie knew better and loved him more for it. One late March storm, the kind that should have been rain but chose snow out of spite, Atlas refused his dinner and lay with his head on the boot tray. Caleb sat on the floor beside him while Hannah put the children to bed. The old dog looked toward the door. No, Caleb said softly. Nobody's out there. Atlas's tag ticked once. Caleb listened. Wind, stove, a branch tapping the roof. Then faintly, tires spinning at the lower bend. Caleb closed his eyes and almost laughed. You smug old operator. Atlas thumped his tail. Maddie appeared in the hallway, hair braided taller now, the cedar fox on a shelf behind her, but never packed away. Someone stuck, sounds like. Hannah came behind her with Eli wrapped in a quilt. Caleb started to push himself up, but Maddie was already moving. She crossed the room, flipped on the porch light, though it was already glowing, as if making the invitation twice as true, grabbed a blanket from the bench, and opened the door before the adults reached it. Snow blew around her in a silver swirl. At the bottom of the slope, a young mother stood beside a half-buried car, with one child crying in the back seat and another clinging to her coat. Maddie stepped onto the porch, no longer the child outside the door, but the one holding it open.
"Come in," she called, clear and steady. "Boots by the stove."
Caleb stopped behind her with Atlas leaning against his leg and Hannah's hand sliding into his. He looked at the porch light, the full boot tray, the old dog, the woman who had come through snow and stayed by choice, the children who had learned that love did not keep death away but made room for life before and after it. He had once believed he was saved by strength. He knew better now. He had been saved by a dog who disobeyed a widow who would not mistake rescue for ownership, a little girl brave enough to name fear, a boy who breathed through the night, and a light left burning so somebody else could find the door. Outside, the young mother started up the hill with her children. Caleb opened the door wider. The lesson of Caleb, Hannah, Maddie, Eli, and Atlas is simple enough to fit in one hand and deep enough to spend a lifetime learning. An open door is not always an invitation, but a heart that walks out into the cold can become one. Many people around us are standing just beyond the porch light, too proud to force their way in and too tired to keep walking. Some are widows, some are veterans, some are children who have learned not to cry. Some are neighbors who say they are fine because they do not know how to ask for warmth. God often sends mercy in ordinary forms. A dog that will not obey a foolish command, a cup of coffee, a repaired generator, a pair of dry socks, a name spoken out loud after years of silence. If this story touched you, write Amen in the comments and think of one person you can check on this week. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that family is not only blood. Sometimes family is who holds the rope, who keeps the light on, and who says, "Come in." There is room here.